Good evening and welcome to Stage 501. So, we've got an interesting stream here for you today, and we have plenty of guests who all need to be introduced or to introduce themselves. And obviously, we'll say to the audience that if you notice anything going on that shouldn't be going on, or if you notice any technical issues that may have developed over time, then you should inform us of that so that we can remedy it as quickly as possible. Now, we're in season 2 now of these live streams. So in the first season, it was kind of an exploratory thing where we were trying to figure out, what is the appropriate way of going forward and, what kind of audience is out there and what they want to hear and so on and so forth. And now we're kind of moving more in the direction of deliberately setting out to promote particular viewpoints. So we're moving away from the purely balanced model and into the gender-based model, frankly speaking. So let's see if you guys will like the direction we're going in. So we have some interesting topics for you today. So I'm just going to list off what the topics are so people will have some idea of what's coming up next, and then we'll go through the introductions. So obviously, I'm your host, Ray Murasame, and the 6 topics are: what are our plans for the new Stage 501 live streams? So obviously, I will explain that. Topic 2 will be the Trump administration and abandoning the Kurdish people. Topic 3 will be Mulvaney gives away the game on Ukrainian quid pro quo. And topic 4 will be academic agent cigar streams. Is it a far-right echo chamber? And then a subcategory under that will be how the far right became anti-trade, which we'll get into, and that's why we have Chicago Liberal here, but more on that in a moment. He will be able to give a very good explanation as to how that happened. We've got topic 5, which is harrowing experiences in far-right Discord servers, which I think plenty of people in this list of guests have some experience on that one. Indeed. And topic 6, which will be the final topic, which is how do we retake spaces for open society in virtual media domains. So that's a very boring sounding phrase, which has a more exciting explanation, which you'll hear when we get to it. So without anything further being said, I think we should go through the list of guests and have them introduce themselves. Now, obviously, I don't need to introduce myself at this point because my introduction is literally on the About page of the YouTube channel, which you all should actually read that About page on the YouTube channel because a lot of people ask me questions about what I stand for. They can literally read the About page on the YouTube channel, so I encourage you to do that. Right, so I guess we'll start from the left. So, Chicago Liberal, can you introduce yourself to me?
Hi, I'm Chicago Liberal. I'm a university student who lives near the city of Chicago, Illinois. And I'm genuinely interested more in political science and the economic side of things for this debate.
Okay, very good. And Chris, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Chris. I'm just a hodgepodge, secular, stoic, anarcho-SOCDEM, libertarian, federalist, Unitarian, utilitarian, humanitarian,
Bruh.
syndicalist.
Bruh.
It's a pretty long introduction, but I mean, I like where you're going with that. So we've got also Voltaire here as well, who may be known to some of the audience, but again, he should still introduce himself anyway.
I go by Voltaire on the internet sphere. I'm just a fellow political traveler, traveling all circles all over the place.
Okay, good to hear from you. And you've been able to get some really interesting interviews over time because I think you were kind of infamous for having called one of the people from, I think it was the Austrian school or something, or was it Chicago school? It was an economist of some sort, and you called this person and said, "Oh, would you like an interview?" And the person actually gave you the interview. Is that right?
Yes.
That's brilliant. Okay, I see people in the chat are complaining that I'm quiet. That my voice is too quiet. Is that actually the case?
I mean, I can hear you just fine.
No, obviously you will be able to, but I mean on the other end when it's coming out. So I'd just like people to give a little check on that to make sure. So we'll go on to the next person, McClure. Can you
If I can just interject, you're coming through fine through the stream, as far as I can tell.
Okay, so you've viewed it on the other side already.
I'm keeping an eye on it.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that. Okay, yeah. So McClure, you can introduce yourself now as well.
All right. So I would basically say that I'm a classical liberal or libertarian, but I just try to be reasonable. And when the evidence is against me, I have no problems changing my opinions. I think that's enough for
Okay.
now.
Oh, and we've reached Hara. So Hara, you can also introduce yourself as well.
Oh man, I hate introductions. But
You and me both.
oh god. You know, thank you, kind sir. But I don't know. All I can say is I'm friggin', ANCOM, which means anarchist communist, which means I pretty much like the idea of the economics they got going on there mostly. I have a lot of disagreements. And I'd like to say I'm Antifa, mostly to scare people. That's about
Okay.
it.
That is well said. We're going to bring up something on what you refer to as anarchism earlier on as well, because obviously when we get down to the part where we're talking about harrowing experiences in right-wing Discord servers, there's an interesting story that I have which involves a bunch of right libertarians getting together and having the weirdest conversation in which they proposed that the word anarcho should be removed from anarcho-capitalism, which I found to be an interesting thing for them to actually acknowledge, because usually it's actually people on the left who are telling them they should remove that word. But there we are. We'll get there eventually. So, the first thing
What
we'll talk
server
about.
was that?
I think you guys can guess, but we'll get there. I'll tell you which
Oh
server it
yeah,
was.
true.
They can only be one server. So
There can
anyway,
only be one.
there can only be one. So, I mean, obviously the first topic, plans for new Stage 501 live stream. So I'm just going to talk pretty casually about like how far we've come and where we're going. So where we've come from is we started out as kind of like a centrist live stream that was kind of doing an exploratory thing where we would talk to right wingers and we would have them on, and we would have like, and I don't mean just like right wingers like center right, I mean like we would actually talk to like people on the extreme far right as well, in order to sort of get their perspective and so on. So we were trying to do this outreach thing, and I always try very hard to be as magnanimous as possible and to be as agreeable as possible when having discussions about things that I may fundamentally disagree with them on. However, it comes down to a position where you can't do that forever. I mean, we're in 2019 at this point, and I hate to sort of invoke that it's the current year meme and whatever, but we're in 2019 at this point, and it's increasingly difficult for anyone to actually sit on the fence or to occupy that centrism space, because that is the shrinking space. And the reason that space is shrinking, at least I believe, the reason that space is shrinking is because a loud minority of people on the right have decided that everything that is not themselves is actually somehow the left. So it's one of those cases where the center ceases to exist because of the fact that at least one of the groups in these two wings of sort of understanding politics has decided they just don't regard the center as a thing that exists anymore. The center is now the left. So we've kind of reached the point where if you want to have productive conversations and you want to be successful in having conversations about contemporary politics, you can't actually go forward by doing the things that people used to do in the 1990s and the early 2000s, which is saying, oh, we're going to sit here and we're not going to be very dramatic and we're going to just sort of talk like we're totally in the beltway or something. Like you can't fully get away with that anymore. You have to actually choose a side. So going forward, we're gonna when we choose a side around here, we're gonna sort of choose a side and we're just gonna say what we're doing. We're not gonna be entirely even-handed. So if people want to come and complain that now we're no longer even-handed, then I put my hands in the air. We are no longer even-handed. So in terms of like properties we want to go forward on, and by properties I mean like iterations of live streams. This is tentative, but 2100 EST every Saturday we have Stage 501, which is just the main live stream, which basically you're listening to right now. And then we're thinking of also having another stream, which will occur at some point, some other time in the week, but we have to get like enough people to do it, because obviously this is an indication to anyone who's out there who's thinking that there are leftist commentary at, and they would like to have like a go at this. We've got another podcast we're thinking of assembling at some point that will occur some point during the week, called New School Leftism. And I'm sure you can imagine what that will be about. And then we're also thinking of expanding into BitChute as well, because obviously BitChute is a place which is a little bit more lawless. And you can sort of, you can be a little bit more edgy over there. And so we're thinking of expanding a little bit into BitChute and having something called This Week in Cringe. Now, This Week in Cringe is going to be a pretty great thing, because what we're going to do is we're going to basically go through social media and go through things that people on YouTube have been saying. We're going to cut and curate the most succulent and best clips from a given week, and then we're going to play those clips back to you with like some clown music in the background, for example, and then we will laugh at them, and we will all laugh together, and it'll be very funny. And that will happen probably like on Sunday or something. If we can get enough people to actually sort of sign up to This Week in Cringe, we can sort of like data mine the whole place and just dig up a whole lot of cringy things and then sort of present them as articles of cringe.
My God, I can actually don't feature so much shit that is said in my class there.
Yeah, you can bring anything that you want. Now, obviously, this is within reason. So, like for example, we're not in favor of doxing. So, like for example, if you have a cringe story that happens to involve having to dox someone, then we will reject that story. We can't have that. But if it's something that occurred in the public domain and the person has put the details of the story out there, or they've made some like ridiculous statement that appears plainly and clearly on social media and will not incite drama for us to quote something that's clearly available in public, then that is candidacy for This Week in Cringe. And then, of course, they have a right to respond, meaning that, of course, when they see the stream, they have a right to respond and say, okay, they don't like the fact that we called what they said cringe, and they would like to come and have a discussion with us about how we should reconsider whether we should classify what they said as cringe. This will, of course, result in even more live streams being created. I'm sure there are plenty of people who went with a sort of This Week In model who have done pretty well. So I think that we should head in that direction as well. So that's 3 properties: Stage 501, New School Leftism, and This Week in Cringe. So that's what we're aiming for. And we don't have the other 2 yet, but we do have this one.
Nice.
Right. So with that covered, let's also talk values. So, like in terms of values, obviously we want to affirm the dignity of every human being. We want to defend human rights, and we stand for increasing prosperity around the world. And we do not discriminate against people on the basis of things they cannot control. I mean, this is quite obvious, but this is one of those things where basically we're in season 2, and it's fitting in the first episode of season 2 to sort of put that on the record and make sure that everyone understands, where we stand on that, just in case there's anyone out there who's going to claim otherwise. So we're just putting that on the record.
So let's move to a better world.
Yeah, so I think we've covered topic 1 appropriately, because I did say that I was going to just sort of talk extemporaneously and see where we ended up on that. And obviously I'm actually reading from the notes, so I'm not actually talking extemporaneously. It just sounds like I am. There I am admitting to reading from the notes. Career ending that. So anyway, topic 2. So, there are some of you who wanted to talk about this, so I've bumped this to the top of the list on purpose. But Trump administration and the abandonment of the Kurdish people. We saw some incredible things take place this week on that note. The Trump administration abandoning the Kurdish people. And the way in which they did this is we saw Trump talking previously about how, he thinks the Kurdish people are great people who have done great, fighting against ISIL and so on and so forth. And then suddenly he comes around this week and has a call with Erdogan, and Erdogan simply rolls him, basically. This is what people were saying in the Washington Post, for example, that he basically got rolled. He's weak, and he just sort of rolled over to the new narrative, which by new, I mean new to him, not new to anyone else, because obviously the Turkish government has been saying the same thing over and over again, and it's been wrong consistently. It's just, I guess Trump has now heard it for the first time, and seems to have some kind of weird belief that the things Erdogan says to him are somehow correct. So he's decided now, he's decided that he's going to just basically sell out the Kurdish people after they've already sort of disarmed in the face of the enemy, and then he's going to pull back and allow them to engage in what is, objectively speaking, ethnic cleansing and a violation of international law. So, what do you guys think about this? What does this say to America's allies
Oh, well,
People
actually,
America, that it basically seems to say we will abandon you. That's basically what America is saying when that happens, isn't it?
Wait, hold on. Let's focus on the domestic situation in America first, because Trump do have a base to appeal to, and the American people are basically are war weary at this point. So this is a political move there first and foremost from that side. And also, this is not the first time that the United States has not really fully committed themselves to the Middle East. Like, the Obama administration did not put on these red lines, and nothing happened. And the Obama administration just sit back there when Assad basically used chemical weapons on their first people. This just sort of represents a trend in American politics that they're not fully committing themselves when they have to, because the public is really war weary after pretty much 18 years of involvement in the Middle East and on the war on terror.
Not fully committing is not equal to allowing your ally to genocide a whole people group.
That is a good point. I mean, it's one thing to say that you're not fully committed or to have doubts about what's going on, but I mean, they could be not fully committed and not have actually allowed that scenario to
Not have pulled out those 20 troops that were preventing Turkey from, basically doing a genocide.
Now there's a ceasefire going on.
That ceasefire doesn't really exist, though, because I mean, Trump came out there and he talked about how they're going to have a ceasefire, and then that was immediately followed up by Erdogan and his prime minister, claiming that the ceasefire is technically not a ceasefire, which is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen.
For the couple of days, they actually stopped fighting, but what's the point if already over 100,000 people were displaced and they cannot return to their homes?
Exactly. It seemed as though that ceasefire was kind of like a weird media stunt to kind of legitimize the actions that had already occurred.
And, I didn't say that in the introduction, but so I live in Poland, and I have to agree with you, Ray, that basically our politicians try to convince us that we basically solely rely on the US for our defense, because obviously we stand no chance against Russia. And everyone in Poland basically brings up Kurds as an example what happens to US allies when they come. I mean, we sent troops to Iraq and Afghanistan, and we only did it because we want to gain some favors in eyes of Americans. And now we see that their allies basically get abandoned left and right.
Yeah. Also, I mean, this is gonna backfire for them in the future. I'm sure of it, because it means that for future allies or people who may in the future want to work with the United States on some discrete issues in some specific way, people will always be thinking in the back of their head now, well, what if the United States, suddenly has a different president in charge who then totally just sells out and allows them to be killed? People are going to be really wary about cooperating with the United States in the future, knowing that at any moment, potentially, you could just be handed over to your opponents.
Yeah.
Yes, and go ahead.
As the American in the room who actually lives in the one Rust Belt state that didn't go to Trump, other than Minnesota, I would have to go and say that the election of Trump itself was actually a fluke, and it really only happened because Clinton was so careless in the Rust Belt that she lost all of it except for the most blue states. So really, getting someone like Donald Trump elected is actually much harder than 2016 made it out to be. So I would think that our allies would still think the United States is reliable, but they would have to go and be a little bit cautious about whether or not the American people actually like the political system, which if they don't, then something like Trump happens and it's shaken up.
So are we going to bring up the fact that it's not the first time the United States abandoned the Kurds? Something happened.
I'm about to do that because this happened before, much to everyone's regret, because, of course, under the administration of George H.W. Bush, there was the instance where, of course, the United States told the Kurdish people in the north of Iraq that the time was now to rise up. And then, of course, they rose up, and then the United States did not actually appear, which then resulted in Saddam Hussein
Dropping chemical
waging
weapons.
chemical
Big
warfare
shocker.
against them.
Man,
I know, right? Shock and awe, right? It's just like, what do you know? The US didn't show up. It's almost like the Kurds have a really, really bad luck with this particular issue, and people keep warning them about this. Obviously, this is not victim blaming. I'm just pointing out that they seem to have a run of bad luck on this particular
No,
issue.
no. People have a bad run of luck with America, period. don't
Well,
think
you could also say that.
Necessarily a Kurdish thing.
No,
So-
it's
Well,
not specifically that group, right?
we can't really blame them. Their only other choice is, basically living under the Iraqi boot, and when the US basically promised them to help them,
Yeah,
can
I
we really
mean,
blame them?
no, on that, McClure, I agree with you, because if you put yourself in their shoes, it looked like a credible offer. And so it would have been a rational choice for them to have believed what the US was saying at that point.
They are dreaming about having their own country for hundreds of years, and there is an opportunity. You have a sole superpower promising to help you, and then basically they abandon you.
They throw their
Yeah.
hands in the air.
I mean,
Also, the
let's go
reasons for
back.
this, because people have been speculating as to what the reasons for this sudden U-turn is. Now, other than it being like an entrenched global class issue, which is that Turkey, on the one hand, as you know, is like a rentier state run by cronies, right? And then, of course, you have on the other hand, which are the Kurdish people, who seem to be a mixture of kind of like landowners, but also like a large base of like peasant farmers and stuff like this, and sort of like small industrialists. And so you have that kind of like class antagonism that exists there. But then you also have something else going on as well, which is, of course, the ethno-religious conflict simultaneously along with the class one. And then you have like sort of layered on top of that also, you have like Donald Trump's own private interests in Turkey, which apparently seem to involve something involving construction and something involving him and Rudy Giuliani covering up for some kind of money laundering operation that the Turks were involved in with regards to evading sanctions that were imposed on Iran. So it seems like there's like at least 3 to 4 levels of complication here, but all of them seem to involve the presidency of the United States being sort of captured by interests that do not line up with the structure of how the US as a state is supposed to operate. Do you guys agree that this is highly irregular in this sense? Because Chicago Liberal was saying earlier on that this whole Trump administration thing is actually an irregularity. Would you say that on at least 3 out of those 4 issues it's an irregularity, Chicago Liberal?
No, it's not. It's not irregularity. If you understand, like there's a columnist I really like called Walter Russell Mead, and this is just basically the revolt of the class. Revolt of the classes, he called it in his own terminology, this Jacksonian revolt, this revival of this popular tradition named after Andrew Jackson. And the people, you understand, the people of America, is just there's just this pulse is that we don't want to look for monsters to destroy. So that's why Trump is just, like I said before, just appealing to his political base to just basically slowly withdraw from truth while maintaining a tough talking rhetoric and maintaining, vital political military bases around the world. It's just that I don't view it as an irregularity in any real sense. It's just more of a revival as a result of the economic crisis of 2008 and the shift of politics basing itself on identity, if anything else.
Okay, so from your conception, Volt, you would say that the events which are now unfolding were basically an inevitable outdrawing of the economic crisis that occurred in 2008. That basically the entire political scene shifting, along with the idea that they ended up electing something like Donald J. Trump, who then happened to be a person who came from the background he came from. All of this you were saying was basically like going to happen as a consequence of this if no one had done anything in between. So there was no scenario for you in which there could have been an election of Donald Trump in which these events did not occur.
Exactly.
Okay.
Is that
Like
fair?
he would inevitably do this. Like I'm not saying it's either
Yeah.
true or not true, but it's an interesting perspective. I mean, I've heard some people say this that he would inevitably do these things.
I just think it's more systemic in American political culture. Like I mentioned, the Jacksonians, people of the Scotch Irish background in the South,
Mhm.
just basically have this really, this really strong. It's more so based on folk community and like they're not really isolationists, but they're more so if something them provoked them like on the international scene, they'd be all for action. And I think something needs to happen that can say that, yeah, this is bad, and Trump's gonna, flex his muscle, use force when necessary.
Okay. Well,
Well,
one thing I'll do for the guests that are watching as well, and you guys can interject after this, is that there's an article from Bloomberg by Nick Wadhams, and I'm just going to sort of put it on screen, and then I'm going to scroll it and read some like choice quotes out of it, and see whether you guys think this is classic case of corruption, and whether this should be kind of folded into the impeachment inquiry, which I haven't actually mentioned, but should be mentioned at some point during this stream. So I'm just going to put it on screen, and because of the way that we're running the stream, you guys should also be able to see it as well as the audience be able to see it as well, because we're doing this the right way. So hold 1 second.
So you friggin' hope.
Or so I hope. I have great hope in many
Cross your
things.
fingers right now.
I'm telling you, this is one of those things where when you're doing this stuff for the first time in the first episode of the first season in which we're doing this, there's always a possibility that everything will literally just collapse on you. But so far, we seem to be doing pretty well.
Okay.
So hold on. Right. So when I'm talking, it should actually show what I'm talking about. Good. That's going pretty well. So yeah, Trump-Erdogan call led to a lengthy quest to avoid Halkbank trial. Right. So I'm just going to read through a little bit of this, and it's going to look really bad at the beginning, but the system will actually clean up the text as we go along. So the resolution should increase itself gradually over time. I don't know why it takes long to do that. So, President Donald Trump assigned his Attorney General and Treasury Secretary to deal with. Actually, I need to switch the thing so that people can actually see it, because people in the chat will not be able to see what I'm talking about. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that, people. I knew I'd make a mistake. Right. Right. So I don't know if someone can check that, but what they should actually now be viewing is the full screen. Is that what's happening? Someone give me a confirmation.
yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay, good.
Yep, confirm.
Okay, so President Donald Trump. Yeah, the quality will go up eventually. President Donald Trump assigned his Attorney General and Treasury Secretary to deal with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's repeated pleas to avoid charges against one of Turkey's largest banks, according to two people familiar with the matter. In an April phone call, Trump told Erdogan that William Barr and Stephen Mnuchin would handle the issue, people said. In the months that followed, no action was taken against Halkbank for its alleged involvement in a massive scheme to evade sanctions on Iran. That changed when an undated indictment was unveiled Tuesday, a day after Trump imposed sanctions over Turkey's military operation in northern Syria. It marks an unusual intervention by a president to get his top cabinet officials involved in an active federal investigation. It's not clear whether Trump instructed Barr and Mnuchin to satisfy Erdogan's pleas, or whether the president was simply tired of being asked about them. But according to a third person who is familiar with Turkey's position, discussions over a deal that would resolve the issue out of court made little headway before Barr took over as Attorney General in February and then became involved in discussions. Over the summer, the White House sought to stop Erdogan and his aides from pestering Trump on the matter, according to a person who was briefed on a number of phone calls that took place and asked not to be identified, discussing private deliberations. In June, the person said, then National Security Advisor John Bolton told a Turkish official, Ibrahim Kalin, that Trump wouldn't engage on the issue directly after delegating it, and that Turkish officials should stop raising it with the president. In a call about the same time, Barr told his Turkish counterpart, Abdul Hamid Gül, that he needed to reach a deal with the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, where the case was under consideration, or it would go to trial. He said Turkey's best option would be to accept a deferred prosecution agreement under which Halkbank would pay a fine and take steps to avoid further wrongdoing. After months of negotiations, Turkish officials ultimately refused because they believed doing so would constitute an admission of guilt, according to the person. A second person familiar with the discussions confirmed that Turkey refused to accept the deal, but said there had been progress toward a resolution. Trump's involvement in his decision to assign Barr and Mnuchin to address the sensitive issue, working with Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, reflected the degree to which the Halkbank case became a priority for the president. You know what? I'm thinking it's possible. It's that this display is shaky because of the fact that it's a dark screen. The next one I'll do is this light screen. In the end, US prosecutors filed criminal charges against Halkbank, accusing it of fraud, money laundering, and violating US sanctions against Iran. It's unclear exactly when the Halkbank indictment was filed, raising questions about whether it was set aside until it became politically expedient for the Trump administration to unseal it. Justice Department officials declined to comment when asked about Barr's efforts, and the Treasury Department declined to comment on Mnuchin's role. The White House declined to comment, and the State Department declined to discuss the part Pompeo played. Bolton declined to comment. The politically explosive indictment came as Turkish-US tensions are soaring over Turkey's military offensive in Syria after Trump's withdrawal of American forces from key border posts last week. On Wednesday, Vice President Mike Pence and Pompeo were due to travel to Ankara for talks with Erdogan over the conflict in Syria. The charges against Halkbank also come after years of public and private lobbying by Erdogan and other top Turkish officials, starting in the Obama administration, to get the investigations into violations of Iran sanctions dropped. The matter is the latest instance linked to Turkey in which Trump has pressed for a solution beyond the bounds of the courtroom. In multiple meetings in 2017, Trump urged then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to persuade the Justice Department to drop the case against Reza Zarrab, a Turkish-Iranian gold trader at the center of the scheme to violate the sanctions. Rudy Giuliani, who later became Trump's personal attorney, represented Zarrab and pressed Trump to intervene on his client's behalf. Is that legal? Zarrab, a Turkish gold trader, ultimately pleaded guilty and became the star witness against a bank executive, Mehmet Hakan Atilla. Zarrab recounted how he'd helped Iran tap funds from overseas oil sales that were frozen in foreign accounts. Attila was convicted in early 2018. Together, the episodes demonstrate Trump's receptiveness to Erdogan's desire to avoid criminal proceedings, and that could shed an unflattering light on his government. Mnuchin and the Treasury Department were also involved because they had a role in determining the size of a regulatory penalty against Halkbank after Attila was convicted in January last year of helping to violate the Iran sanctions. Critics said they grew alarmed that the fine hadn't been issued more than a year after the executive's conviction in January 2018. Some suspected that Erdogan's persistent lobbying about the Halkbank case. He brought it up during the Obama administration, including twice in meetings with Vice President Joe Biden, only to be rebuffed, successfully persuaded Trump administration officials to hold back. Evidence overwhelming. The evidence against Halkbank and, by extension, the Turkish government was overwhelming in this case, said Michael Rubin, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Quote, but the Turks went full force lobbying the Trump administration on this to avoid accountability. Frankly, some in the Trump administration were all too receptive to arguments that the mess was a result of Obama rather than a deliberate scheme on the part of the Turks. Halkbank did hire powerful lobbyists to advocate on his behalf. We should probably discuss lobbyists at some point after this as well.
You know what we should discuss?
Hold on. On its behalf, before the Trump administration, according to Justice Department filings. One such lobbying firm was Ballard Partners, which was paid almost $780,000 from November 2018 through March of this year to work on Halkbank's behalf. It renewed its contract for $40,000 a month in late July. Quote, what we had been doing was making the case to relevant administration officials about the importance of this bank to the financial system of Turkey and Turkey's economy, and that, in taking into account that Turkey is a NATO ally and the potential implications, the steps against the bank would have profound repercussions. Ballard partner Jamie Rubin, a State Department spokesman in the Clinton administration, said in an interview. What is this revolving door? Rubin said Ballard ended its contract with Halkbank as of Wednesday. The matter is now in the judicial system. This is a natural endpoint for our representation, Rubin said in an interview. Turkey's decision-making. Critics of Trump's decision-making on Turkey also point to his refusal so far to sanction the country over its decision to purchase the S-400 missile defense system from Russia, as U.S. law requires. It's amazing how his refusal to do that at the beginning, I'm just interjecting here, his refusal to do that earlier has now led to this worst-case scenario. But we go on. When Turkey started receiving parts for the system this summer, the State Department forwarded a list of recommended sanctions to the White House, only to have Trump ignore them, Bloomberg News reported at the time. While Trump had been silent on the Halkbank case, public evidence that he's talked to others beyond his top staff about it. Public evidence suggests, In an August phone call with a pair of Russian pranksters who presented themselves as Turkey's defense minister, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said Trump was, quote, very sensitive to the, quote, case involving the Turkish bank, according to Politico. Quote, the president wants to be helpful within the limits of this power, said Graham, a close Trump ally. Like, literally, why would he say that?
I'm more surprised that Lindsey Graham is a Trump ally, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Did
I
he
mean,
get doxxed by Trump during the election?
something. I mean, how did that ridiculous situation actually evolve? But hold on, I just need to switch the screen back, so hold on.
No. Listen here, Missy.
Okay, we should be back with the cherry blossoms now. Right, so yes, how did
Go ahead.
Lindsey Graham become this sort of cringing creature? I mean, did Trump just walk up to him and, like, I don't know, do something really horrendous to him? And then, like, I don't know, did he then start referring to himself as Reek? Like, is that what happened?
Oh my god.
I know, it's a Game of Thrones meme, it had to be done, right?
No, it didn't.
But I mean, this is where Lindsey Graham was. Like, he used to be someone. He used to be John McCain's best friend. And now look at him. He's like a cringing shadow of his former self.
He was always kind of garbage. He's just an opportunist. That's what most of the Republicans are, and that's what he's always been. So I'm not that surprised that he would sell out to Trump after McCain died.
That's fair, actually.
Wow. So you guys are like really just dunking on Lindsey Graham today. But
I mean,
yes,
why shouldn't we?
I mean, yeah, he deserves it at this point, though. Everything that's said about him that's negative now, I mean, he deserves it. Unless it's going to turn out at the end that he was like, super deep, like ultimate mole or something, and he was like
Right.
cuddling up to Donald Trump for the purpose of selling him out the whole time. That's the only way that he's going to have a redemption arc at this point.
I know you're excited.
But yes, what were you going to say?
Slow
Because I
down.
kept interrupting
I was
you.
gonna
Sorry.
ask. Yes, you did. It was pretty relevant.
Okay.
Some of your poor and dear admiring fans in the
Uh-huh.
chat. One apparently high on acid. I commend this man. But
Yeah.
Right.
they ask ever so kindly and out of respect that you slow your speech down a degree so that others can understand you better. I'm personally used to it.
It's a good
but-
call. Yeah,
but
I
yes,
tend to get
just-
like that when I'm reading an article because I'm trying to get to the end of it.
I always listen to Ray times two.
Wait, sorry. I'll shut up in a minute, but Heber made me fucking laugh when he said breathe, because you might honestly just have to implement breathing a bit here.
Yeah,
I love
we're gonna work that into the programming. We're just gonna be like, there needs to be like a pop up on my screen that will just be like, remember to breathe, and that will probably help things out. So no, we'll deal with that. Okay, so I mean, with that long list of stuff though, which was displayed on screen, I'm sure you guys were able to read probably most of it because I don't know whether it was actually displaying correctly. We'll have to look into that too. But from that, it looks like he's pretty compromised because why is Trump going out of his way to be really sensitive toward this Turkish bank for some reason? Is there something that Trump has in that bank or some business he has with that bank that's being used as some kind of leverage by the Turkish government? Do you guys think that's what it is?
I don't know,
Maybe.
probably, because I mean he's building like he has a Trump Tower in Istanbul or something like that, so I wouldn't doubt it at all.
Aren't Trump ties produced in Turkey?
Say again? Oh, Trump ties, you say? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it could be something like manufacturing as well. So I mean, people need to look into that. Obviously, our audience is out there listening, and they have the power of Google Food, right? So and of course, obviously, all of you do too. But I mean, McClure, you were quite right to mention manufacturing as well. I mean, people can look into that because that might be the next story.
I think that I heard somewhere that they are actually manufactured in Turkey, but I'm not sure about that. There is some article saying that Trump furniture is produced in Turkey.
Oh dear.
I mean, I think the
that
ties
may
are
be
in
a thing.
Bangladesh.
Oh, you're saying the ties are in Bangladesh? Yeah, yeah. Maybe the ties are in Bangladesh and the furniture is in Turkey then. But I mean, obviously, people can look into that and find out because it's going to be something. It's going to be something. I mean, let's be real, people. It's going to be something, right?
Yeah.
Well, it could well be that Turkey just agreed to buy a lot of weapons from the US.
Oh, in
that are
exchange for
all,
being allowed to carry out violations of
yeah,
international law.
yes, basically overpriced weapons.
I mean,
Instead
that's
of
a real
buying from,
slap. That's a real slap in the face of the United Nations as well, because if the US is supposed to be one of the biggest backstops for the United Nations Authority, right? Then, I mean, this is a violation of like one of the fundamental laws that came into
well,
effect post-war after 1945, which is, thou shalt not commit genocide against people who are your neighbors or anywhere actually, right? But now it's kind of like everything is so transactional that they'll just openly do the transaction. I saw this thing recently, and I hate to actually quote Edward Snowden because of the fact that I don't really like him, but there was a point that he actually made a long time ago, and by a long time ago that might be like a month ago maybe, because stories gallivant on so fast now. Literally 2 days from now we'll be referring to this day as a long time ago, because by then something more amazing and absolutely psychotic will have happened in the White House, and we'll be talking about that instead. But Edward Snowden has said that his assessment of like Trump's personality is that he has a transactional personality because he was raised in a family in which he was always told that he was never good enough, and that any element of love which he experienced was provided to him on a conditional basis. And
But
this somehow shaped his entire personality going forward. Now, obviously, I don't know anything about the psychologizing process. I don't think I know enough about Donald Trump's like childhood or whatever to know whether that's correct or not correct. But it's one of those things where it sounds almost intuitively like a thing that could be true.
okay.
I mean, do you
Oh,
guys think that there's a psychological element behind why Trump is susceptible to this kind of play by the Turkish state, for example, or by Russia, or by whoever else?
He's just lazy. I mean, he's the kind of person that probably just got through school because of connections and didn't actually do any work.
I mean, that's also a thing too, because he often seems to like come out with phraseology or like a new line that he's going to bring, and it's usually something he just heard someone else say, perhaps like a day earlier or something. Like I get the impression that he might have picked up the phone to Erdogan, and then Erdogan gave him some stuff and some talking points, and then suddenly he came out sounding like he was TRT News or something, which is obviously the Turkish news station.
honestly, this seems to be like typical behavior of most U.S. presidents in the 21st century, if you ask me. Like, just be friendly like Erdogan or be friendly with Putin, and it's just like this is just nothing new to me out of the ordinary. I'm just saying, like,
Like, I mean, he's been
people.
behaving that way all along, so I mean, maybe there is something to that.
I'm just saying is that this should not be seen as a surprise, as a big surprise. Why Trump's actions are perceiving this way,
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, there's another question I want to go with as well, because this is the part that we haven't actually covered, which is the ideological components. So let's look at this ideologically. Do you think that there's some element behind this in which either Trump and or his supporters, perhaps not Trump, because Trump might not have even thought this through to that extent, right? But his supporters at least may be rationalizing this in their own brains to themselves by pointing out that the Kurdish people, or at least the movement which is being blamed for things among the Kurds, which is the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, that they have some kind of animus toward this organization because they're still weirdly living in some kind of strange Cold War mentality in which, like, anyone who isn't literally a lunatic, sort of like fringe tier right-wing activist is somehow magically a communist, and they need to fight against these people, even if that somehow magically includes allowing Turkey to commit war crimes.
That sounds about right.
Because I mean, I'm getting that impression. I mean, I had that conversation. I saw several people on social media who, when challenged on this issue, responded with that kind of bizarre response where they're talking about how they just don't like the fact that the Kurds are trending leftward on stuff regionally. And I'm thinking, well, I thought, and this is one of those things where it's like I say this semi-cynically, but also with some level of innocence involved. But I mean, I thought that after September the 11th, any movement to the left in the Middle East would be seen as absolutely welcome. I mean, am I crazy here? But apparently they don't want that. Apparently they want only right wingers in the Middle East or something. And I think we've seen before what that actually turns out to look like. Because I mean, do these guys imagine that like ISIS is not going to get free as a consequence of them rolling the Kurds?
Some of them did already get free. They successfully stormed one of the prisons and got some of the prisoners out.
Oh, wonderful! Oh, that's absolutely bad.
Can you screen share an article from the National Interest?
Oh, yeah, you're free to screen share. Give me 1 second.
Well, I can't do it. It's on my tablet. Can you do it?
Oh, can I do it? Give me a second. I might be able to do that for you.
Honestly,
yes. Send me the link. Send me the link as a direct message on Discord, and then I'll load it up and then I'll be able to switch to it.
Okay.
And then obviously just tell me when you've done it.
I just keep thinking about what happened in the late 70s under the Ford administration with the Kurds, and I keep thinking, what was the reasoning why they had to cut off, aid to them? The CIA. The background, the CIA was sending them funds, arms, and money, basically to resist Iraq expansionism on those lines. But the Shah at the time quickly made a peace settlement with them, and basically told Kissinger at the time to cut them off, leaving them at the mercies of Iraq. So
did that cutoff happen around the time that the Iranian Revolution happened?
No, it was before. It was a couple years before. It was like in around 1975. Because if you read the memoirs of Dr. Kissinger, he seems to say that geography is always going to play against the Kurds. The reason why he kind of cut them off is because they didn't have the heavy arms to fight off the resistance, and secondly, the terrain of the Middle East around Iraq is so mountainous they couldn't get to them in time or something like that. So that's why I'm kind of apprehensive to the Kurds and their state
Oh, so to be clear for the audience as well, was it basically an argument based on logistics?
Yes.
That the United States could not operate to support the Kurds on long lines of supply, given that they're in a particular location which is difficult for them to actually operate in?
Yes.
And that was in 1975?
Around that time, yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's one of those things where, and this might sound a little controversial, but I mean, that's one of those things where I would be willing to actually have that particular conversation with them on that issue. Right? But when we come to the year 2019, when American troops were actually on the ground physically in the location, then I don't think they'll be able to use that excuse. Because in that instance, they can't say that they're beyond lines of supply, given that they were literally there being supplied for years.
You must also take into consideration the fact that this doesn't make sense. Like Trump basically pushed Kurds to take land south of their ethnic regions, mainly inhabited by Arabs. And this happened, all of the land south of Deir Azor and Raqqa is basically inhabited exclusively by Arabs, and Kurds had no intention of conquering that land from the ISIS before. And we could say that this was basically to control all of the oil fields, which happened to be right of the Euphrates River near the Iraqi border. So it seemed that US wants to control all of the Syria's oil. And now he's basically abandoning that, and Assad is basically taking that back already.
Yeah, that's the ironic thing as well. Yes, because I wanted to point that out, because I got into quite a bit of a spat with let's say, MAGA people in 2016 over this precise issue. When I said to them, and I have a way of putting things, sometimes it gets people's back up maybe, but I said to them, they were talking about Kurds, and they were talking about the partitioning of part of Syria, and I said to them, and also the Nineveh Plain in Iraq as well.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, if your name is ExxonMobil, then you should actually find recognizing the sovereignty of these people to be incredibly lucrative. So not only is it the right thing to do, it's also the profitable thing to do. And those are two things that usually don't quite go together in this
Wait.
cynical, horrible world that we have. But in this particular
Wait,
scenario,
wait.
it would have been both profitable and correct. And yet,
Wait,
the level of insanity that's going on here now is that people are choosing to not make money so as to actually do something wrong. Like, how on earth is that even a thing? But here we are, right?
I think the U.S. is just losing incentives. You bring up the economic side. United States is going oil independent right now, so they losing that incentive. That why even?
Yeah,
bother?
I mean, we're
Yeah, but
actually
still,
producing
even
more
if
oil
you're-
than Saudi Arabia now. So,
But still, even if that is the case, you would still want to put other supplies on lock, because why would you want to
Yes.
have like your rivals in control of those things, right?
Yes, basically Russia is now controlling all of that oil, and before that, when you control 90-something% of Syria's oil, this country cannot function without that.
You control oil, you control nations, you control food, you control the
Well,
population.
Well,
All hail the overlord.
not to mention that that Rojava, the Kurdish part of Syria, was the breadbasket of the whole country. This is where all of the farmlands happen to be.
So
Like areas around Kamishlo, these are traditionally.
let's put this conversation in more like geopolitical and strategic terms. I'm still thinking, what is the rationale between Trump's action? Because they're usually like a process debate, like the National Security Council. I'm just thinking, if I was part of Trump's National Security Council, what would be the reason why to let Turkey, in theory, handle the ISIS to wipe them out, but also sacrifice a major ally?
They supplied the ISIS. They helped them actively. They were buying their oil and helping them to sell that to the world markets.
I'm just saying. I'm still trying to figure
I
that
want to
out.
point that out as well. Yes, I will agree completely with McClure on that particular point. Turkey was caught already doing the precise thing. MIT, which is not MIT in the United States, obviously, but MIT in the Turkish context, which is the Turkish intelligence service. The Turkish intelligence service actually was engaged in a black market trade of oil with ISIS.
We all saw those trucks driving to Turkey.
Yeah, the trucks were there, and there were also people in Turkey who were parliamentarians who actually exposed documents on this issue. And additionally, there was a female journalist of Turkish origin who actually broke some part of that story as well, and then she later mysteriously died in some kind of like weird car accident that somehow involved firearms. So, I mean, that was something as well. And so that was that. And then also there was the coup attempt, and I'm sure you all remember the coup attempt, which was blamed on like nascent Kemalists or something like this. And I don't know if you guys witnessed the footage, because the news does this really bad job sometimes, so they don't describe who is shooting at what. The first footage that we saw in that valiant coup attempt that was attempted against the government of Erdogan, which was becoming increasingly autocratic and cronyist at that point, the first thing that was fired upon by those helicopters when they came out was a Turkish intelligence building. Why? Because that was supposed to be a retribution for the fact that they had collaborated with ISIS.
Okay, you must also know that the current invasion is only supported by the Turkish troops, but a large portion of the invading troops are actually like Islamist goons sent by Turkey. Some former Al-Qaeda and ISIS members. Well, Al-Qaeda rebranded actually 2 times, and they rebranded to Al-Nusra.
Yeah.
They got transported from the Idlib province through Turkey and currently are invading the Kurds. Because also all of the most of the Idlib province is still controlled by Al-Nusra and Turkey. So people who basically caused 9/11 are now supported by your biggest ally.
I know
That
it's
is
the
weird.
most insane thing. And yes, they've since changed their name from Al Nusra to
Yeah, something
HTS, which
else.
is what's
I
HTS
don't
stand for?
know.
Harat Tahrir al-Sham. That's what it
Yes,
is.
yes. And Al-Sham, I think, dismissed
Hayat
Syria
Tahrir
or something
al-Sham.
like that.
And so, I mean, and of course, obviously, HTS, despite all of its swearing down that they don't have any association with supposedly AQ, it's literally an arm of AQ in the sense that
Yes, it's a Syrian
the
branch
only
of Al
reason that they
Qaeda.
don't the only reason that they're not literally calling themselves AQ is because, to quote them, they claim that they do not want to have a direct connection to Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was basically deputy leader of Al Qaeda until Osama bin Laden died, and then he took over. So, I mean, literally, it is literally Al Qaeda.
Not to mention that we have this Sunni Shia split. Basically, Syrian regime is from a minority religion located on the coast of Syria.
Latakia, right? Mostly
Yeah,
concentrated in that region.
Yes, but also Tartus and yes. So Alawites, I think they are called that, and all of the Islamists are basically Sunni. So the same.
And so they're having that conflict. And the thing about this is, and I think this is something that perhaps the United States, and you can tell me whether you disagree with this or not, but I think the United States misunderstood one of the key elements of this war from the start, when they said to Bashar al-Assad that, all he needs to do is step down and everything's going to be okay because they're going to organize a new government. In that organization of a new government, that would result in Alawites ceasing to exist.
Yeah,
because of the fact that, like,
they would get genocided.
Just in case people have forgotten, the Alawites don't believe in wearing a head covering. The Alawites also believe that there is something called transmigration of souls, in which basically a dead person then travels up through the stars through different life forms until and going through the different stars until they reach the Milky Way, which is where the ancestors allegedly reside. And so when the Alawites look up into the sky, they actually believe that they're looking at their past ancestors who are shining down on them. All of these kind of things are things that Sunni Islamists don't find to be very nice, because obviously Sunni Islamists are monotheists strictly, and they don't have like these folk traditions that they blend in with their belief. Whereas obviously the Alawites are much more relaxed about religious stuff, and you end up with a complete culture clash. I mean, one of the most poignant elements of this war when it first started was, like, I think it was the 5th building that was shelled by the supposedly free Syrian army. The 5th building they attacked was like the Feminist Something Institute. I mean, isn't that the most ridiculous thing? But the United States was like, oh no, it's going to be fine. There's no way it's going to be fine, because the Alawites are believe they are fighting for their lives, so they were never going to surrender. They would have done exactly what they did in fact do, which is continue to fight until half the country, 70% of the country had been reduced to rubble, rather than surrender.
Well, yes, and we also have to mention that most Muslims don't even see Alawites as Muslims. They think they are just heretics or something else. So it's basically okay to kill them.
And it's just like this is the level of extremism. I think a lot of people in the West, I mean, obviously you understand it because you're telling it to me now, but obviously, there are plenty of people in the West who don't understand the level of extremism that actually exists in these scenarios, and that there was never going to be a sort of political deal between these people who hate each other that much.
No, there was an analogy that compared the Middle East to the 30 Years' War.
Yeah, I mean, they are kind of having a 30 Years' War clone that's happening right now.
You think it's going to produce religious toleration and a form of Westphalianism?
Or if you want to call it a Second World War, it's almost as the Middle East is having its own Second World War, quite similar to how Africa had the equivalent of a Second World War that happened during the Cold War.
Yes. At least in my opinion, this is mainly caused by the fake borders and United Kingdom and France.
Yeah, I mean, there is some element to that, but I mean, from the perspective of the Alawites, I mean, without France's like presence in that particular scenario, I mean, would history have played out exactly the same way with them being in control of a whole country? in the way that they are? Perhaps not. Maybe they would have had their own country by itself or something. But even then, perhaps that country by itself might still have been attacked by whatever Sunni majority country was neighboring it. So, I mean, I hear you on that, but I'm just not entirely sure that if you were to draw a border around radical Sunnis, they would not exceed that border. I mean, we saw this. We've seen this play out in other ways before. I mean, look at the September 11th, 2001 attacks, for example. Before that, the United States in Afghanistan, for example, had basically stepped back and given accommodation to allow the Taliban to continue to operate in the way that it was operating, on the basis that the Taliban will somehow broker some kind of like pipeline policing agreement about a Pakistan-Uzbek pipeline, right? So the United States was not even touching them. Not even touching them. They could do whatever they want. Any kind of like tyrannical regime they wanted to create, they were okay to create that, apparently. And the United States, for whether people think it's right or wrong, was not actually meddling in that pot in a way that would have been offensive to the fundamentalists. It was basically letting the fundamentalists get away with murder. And yet, those same fundamentalists, when asked in 1995 by Mohammed Mir, the same fundamentalist, Mullah Omar, gave the response that he was still going to bring Osama bin Laden into the country and allow him to execute his plots purely for the clout. And I'll show the obviously anyone wants proof on that, I'll show the article. But basically, apparently, he literally gave this as an interview when they asked, why are you working for the United States? To which he then responded that he's not working for the United States and he'll prove it by allowing Osama bin Laden to operate in Afghanistan. And then, of course, by the time a couple of years had passed, I think it was about 2 years later, Bhutto was overthrown in Pakistan, and then Al-Qaeda entered the country and began operating training camps, and then they did the first trial demo for what would later become the September 11, 2001 attacks. And so I'm not saying that you're claiming that stepping back causes good things to happen, but I'm just saying that in the case where the objective case where they did step back, it didn't actually result in a cessation of conflict. Instead, they just carried on doing what they were going to do anyway.
Well, I meant more that, just look at Iraq, for example. They deliberately, I don't know, it's just a fake country. It consists of 3 equal parts of 3 different people groups that basically hate each other, and they don't want to live in one state.
Oh yes, I understand what you're saying now. Sorry about that. Then yes, I was going off on a completely different angle there. Yes, you're saying that it's a bad idea to obviously put people who don't like each other within the exact same state boundary.
Yeah.
So to summarize, you're saying is the United States and the policymakers in Washington underestimated the sectarianism in the Middle East.
Well, yeah.
Yes, they underestimated not just the sectarianism itself, I think, but the extent to which people who are cornered would not be likely to surrender. Because I think that maybe there was some policymaker in Washington who thought that Assad was going to have like a negotiated peace in which he would make a compromise with the conservative Sunnis in the rural areas of his country. Like, that was never going to happen. I mean, anyone who looked at the Hama incident, for example, should have known that was never going to happen.
Oh, man. Okay, the big question of the day is: so Turkey should remain in NATO or kicked out?
Kicked out.
Well, this is a joke that I used to tell on this issue. I'll let you go first. Go on.
If we're going to look morally, yes, Turkey should be kicked out. But if we're actually going to look at the geopolitical situation and how important the Bosporus Strait and control of it actually is, yeah, we have no choice but to have them stay.
We have no choice but to conquer Constantinople.
This is the joke I was going to make. That there was one time when I was actually talking to some Turks, because occasionally in the job that I happen to have, occasionally it involves me having to talk to them, which is never a good thing. But I had this conversation with them, and they said the exact thing, which is, "Oh, what are you going to do? Kick us out of NATO then?" And I was kind of like, "Well, no, actually, what we'll do is we'll keep you in NATO. We'll just kick your government out of the country." Because think about it this way. I mean, you have the West has a value for the Bosphorus Strait, right? That does not require Erdogan to be the president of Turkey.
Exactly.
I mean, you could have control over the Bosphorus Strait and have like a literal clown in control of Turkey, for example. What would be the functional difference?
Well, actually,
What
Clown
would
might
even be the
better
difference
for
on the
Turkey.
ground?
Well,
There
the
already
clown would be
is a
better, no,
clown
so-
in charge.
Yeah, I mean, there already is a clown in charge. I mean, our clown would be better, of course.
Even the monkey would be better.
or mimes, for example. I mean, they would also be better. They would speak less.
Yeah, at least they'd shut up.
Who
They
said
would
the
at least
secret
shut up.
word? It was mime. Oh my god!
And yes, for all of you out there who guessed the secret word was going to be mime, congratulations.
Fucking wow, brilliant. I in the name of fucking. Never
Yeah,
mind.
name
Fuck
of
it.
fucking.
In the name of fucking,
That's
I salute
weird.
you.
Okay.
Oh come on, don't be such a prude.
No, it's
Like,
fine. No, it's absolutely no, it's absolutely
Respect
fine.
my slutty ways, right?
It's
Okay.
absolutely fine. But I mean, basically, this is where we are. Mimes would run Turkey better than Erdogan is presently running it. And I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
people are going to say,
Well,
"Oh, we're being unfair here." No, we're not being unfair because I mean,
Like,
Turkey is a rentier state, objectively speaking. Its economy is basically a stack of like intricately balanced cards, which are all resting atop quicksand. Like we've seen we've seen the analysis from like last year, for example, where they were all over the place doing all kinds of things that are going to have really profoundly bad structural effects later on. In fact, some of these things are so bad that I can't even remember how to actually describe them. So if anyone else has like a description of what they've done, like go ahead and submit that
Bad.
accurate description.
Good.
Okay. They always been the sick man of Europe for the last 300 years of its history. So, hurrah, I don't know.
well, they are losing money, like GDP, every year, and this is not by, I don't know, 0.2%. It's actually massive. They're
So-
becoming a third world country.
So, Ray, what's the third topic?
Yeah, we are kind of like beating this one to death, aren't we?
Mm,
Yes.
So we can transition
Like a
seamlessly into the
horse
third
that
topic.
is deceased, right?
The horse is
Like
very
a
much
horse
deceased.
That is deceased.
Well, it's so dead at this point that it's like literally become undead in time for Halloween, which is quite soon. And it will just ride out as like the bone horse or something, right? So we can go on to the third one. So the third one is Mulvaney gives away the game on Ukrainian quid pro quo. Now, I mean, I'm sure you all saw that because this is one of those things where I like to tell stories sometimes. This one turned out as a really funny story.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
You like to tell stories,
I do
Buzz
indeed.
Killington? Tell us an
Don't
interesting
call me
story
Buzz
about a
Killington.
bridge, please.
Okay.
So yes, prepare for the story about a bridge. No, I'm just kidding. So
Yeah, I
Anyway.
know you're not.
we were all in the office, right? And so big screen TV on, and of course it's on to CNN because of course, like what other channel would be on other than that or MSNBC? But we're there watching this ridiculousness play out, and unbelievably, Mulvaney begins responding in a press conference thing or whatever the excuse for a press conference is that they think they're having. I don't know whether it's even still worth calling a press conference, but you know, a session in which a man stands at a podium and talks, and like 90% of what he says is probably lies, and then everyone kind of pretends it's not for a while. So Mulvaney comes out, and he is asked a question, and I can't remember which, amazing award-winning journalist asked this question, but it was a very blunt question, which was basically, did quid pro quo actually happen with Ukraine, and is this stuff normal? Like, I mean, that's a summary of his question because I can't remember the exact phraseology of it. And then Mulvaney, who I don't know what was wrong with him in that moment, decided he was going to lean over his podium and say that, yes, it was indeed, and that additionally, this is something which they have been engaging in all the time. And then, like, you could actually feel the silence in the room. You can actually feel the silence around the world. You can actually feel like the jaws dropping to the ground as
My
he said
God, I
this.
think-
And then
oh my
other
God.
journalists then asked him again, because they couldn't believe he'd actually said it, to see whether he would like walk back the ridiculous statement he had just made. And then he like didn't walk it back. He just didn't walk it back. So now we're kind of at a point where the White House itself is basically admitting to the thing that they had denied they had done last month. And his supporters, his MAGA supporters, every time you ask them about this particular piece of footage, they will just claim they have not seen the footage. Because of course, right? So, like, what do you guys think of this? Like, how far down the hole of, like, impeachment is this now when the White House is like pseudo defense is basically okay, yes, they did it, but it's normal somehow, even though it's not.
They didn't have a Dick Dastardly mustache, so it does not count. That is a requirement for quid pro quo in America. You need to have a Dick Dastardly mustache.
You have to have the Dick Dastardly mustache, and the sack of money you're holding has to apparently have like literally the dollar sign on it, and not just the dollar sign with
Yes.
like the one slash through it. It has to have the 2 bars through the dollar sign, so it looks like something from a Warner Brothers cartoon. And additionally, on top of that, the man that you're handing the sack of money to has to be not just dressed as the Monopoly Man, but like the literal Monopoly Man. Like it needs to be like some kind of like CG model Monopoly Man thing that has then been produced in China as like a full bodysuit, and then the person has to be like in the bodysuit of the Monopoly Man, and then he has to receive the money, and then he has to go, "Mwah ha 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 ha, this is quid pro quo." Otherwise, no one in the MAGA universe will actually believe it's quid pro quo.
Yep,
man.
that's pretty right. That's how quid pro quo works in America.
Well, you just dabbed on us hard.
Is anyone gonna do a William F. Buckley impression of saying quid pro quo?
I feel attacks.
Stop giggling. You're making me giggle. It's so infectious.
No.
And of course, obviously, we should cover like why the Ukrainian thing is important. So obviously, the reason the Ukrainian thing was important was because they were conditioning, having Zelensky research like Giuliani's weird brain fever conspiracy theories about Hunter Biden, on the condition that if they don't do that, then they won't get the weapons they need to fend off Russian aggression in their eastern provinces. So basically, it's kind of like the equivalent of saying that you're going to be subjected to hardship and possibly death unless you humor the ramblings of Rudy Giuliani, who believes that Hunter Biden is somehow in collaboration with the Ukrainian gas company to... And it's never actually like really elucidated as to what the collaboration was supposedly about in this conspiracy theory, like what it was they were actually doing. They never actually get that far because it's all about the theater. So when you do press them on it, particularly the MAGA bots, they will usually come back at you with like some kind of thing like, oh, it's corruption or something like this. But then when you actually read the story of what was happening, you discover that Hunter Biden and Joseph Biden were trying to actually get that company to be subjected to law. So you end up with like the story being literally the opposite of what the MAGA people claim that it is, with the outcome being the literal opposite of what they claim it is as well. But if you go among the cult on the social media, you find like completely different things being said. They exist almost in a completely different hive universe at this point. Like there was one time, and I just basically had to spend an hour of my time that I will probably never get back, diving into the hive universe of the MAGA bots to see how long it would take me to reach something that's so absolutely ridiculous that like even the most sort of cynical person would actually be surprised. So I went through the whole hive universe, came down to the end of it, and at the bottom of it, you end up finding like these weird people talking about Elvis and claiming that he was not actually dead, and also claiming that JFK is somehow alive, and all kinds of other madness like this. And I'm thinking, okay. What Trump has done is he has successfully weaponized like every single mentally ill person within the right-wing movement to the United States. I mean, that's almost what it looks like.
Inappropriate laughter alert.
Yes, we're not.
Okay.
I should clarify. We're not laughing at mentally ill people in general, because obviously it's a very serious issue which needs to be addressed with increased funding in the United States because it has been cut. What I'm talking about in this case is obviously the more what's the word for it? The more colloquial use of this term, i.e., people who believe things which are literally crazy, but they also have the temerity to involve themselves in politics at the same time.
Poetically
Just do what one of my friends does and only serve those places when completely high.
I like this man. A lot.
It makes it so much more fun.
Yeah. Someone in the live chat is asking what's an example of literally crazy. Well, I mean, I just literally gave one. an example of literally crazy is when you begin asking someone a series of questions who's in the MAGA universe, basically. You ask them a series of
As someone,
questions,
okay,
and somehow they take you on a wild ride about how Donald Trump is like some kind of like weird savior figure, and that somehow this magically involves disappearing people and the possibility of Elvis being alive or something. Like when you get down to that level, there is no doubt in your mind as to the fact that this is
okay,
crazy.
psychological, self-proclaimed expert interjecting for
Okay, go
your
ahead.
sake. Crazy is such a shitty word. And I could
This is
argue that no one is crazy, no matter their crazy take, quote unquote, because as you know, to us or neurotypical people, crazy means like delusional or like ignorant. So ignorant you can't believe it because, you
Mhm.
know, it's like it seems crazy, quote unquote, but to call them crazy is kind of like a soft attack on people who suffer from mental illness and get like labeled crazy for irrational thinking and the like. It's not like evil or anything, but it's definitely frustrating for these people to
Yeah.
have takes because the people who usually have these takes are quite mentally sound, in fact.
There's also that I've heard some people also push back with that one as well, saying that that basically the kind of madness you sometimes get out of or mad sounding things, I should say, that you sometimes get out of Trump supporters is actually not what it's on the surface appears to be. It's kind of like who is it? Was it Popper who said this about anti-Semitism in Germany in the 1940s, where they said that some of these theories are so whack that you're not supposed to actually believe them. It's because they're trolling themselves and others. Do you think that's what it could also be?
I'm sorry, what? I
Perhaps.
dissociated.
No, I'm saying do you think it's similar to what happened in the 1940s in Germany, in which basically you ended up with like weird conspiracy theories, for example, the anti-Semitic conspiracy
Oh,
theories that were
it's
engaged in Germany,
definitely
that these are very similar in the sense that they're just telling the stories, you're not supposed to really believe them.
it's definitely I can't say where it originated from. I'm sure it's been around since the dawn of time. Like if we look at Spartans, for example, kind of shit. Like, okay, I'm talking like mostly fucking made up stories here, but like
Mhm.
there is history terms where like there's been societies who like condemn disabilities because it's a weakness and they destroy their young for it, and it's pretty fucking bizarre. And it like
Mhm.
yeah, Hitler jumped in and was like, hey guys, this is a really cool idea because like it was so easy just to be like, hey, look at this person, they're not thinking what I think is quote unquote rational because usually emotional and rational get confused a lot. Like being emotional doesn't mean you're crazy or anything. I don't know. Hitler was fucked, and he definitely made a lot of excuses as to why mentally ill people are bad, and that was pretty evident when he went out of his way to destroy all the research suggesting
Yeah.
otherwise, actually.
Well, that was why I was very clear in saying that obviously I'm not trying to like cast blame onto all mentally ill
Oh
people or something
no,
like that.
I'm just like, softening your language for you. That's
There
all.
we go. No, it's good that someone interjected with that, because I mean perhaps that might have been misquoted later on had that not occurred. Um,
By
the other thing I'll
certain
point
people,
out,
of course, that we know.
yeah, I mean obviously there are
Yeah,
people
and
out there
those
who are
ones are
looking to quote
usually
my
like,
name.
fuck off.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously the kind of people who are going to misquote this anyway are the kind of people who also are the problem, because they
They
probably
make
don't
me
believe
laugh.
progressive things themselves.
They make
But
me laugh so hard. Every time they come at me with something, I get like probably 50 more
we'll get
followers.
we'll get to that soon though. So
Okay, okay.
yes, what this comes down to is basically, I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing called QAnon, which is basically like a conspiracy theorist like funhouse, if you like, of just like stuff, people just making stuff up constantly. And so there was someone who was making a great joke about this, who was saying that basically, if the Kurds want to get support from Trump, the only way they're going to get it at this point would be if they promise to invade Comet Pizza on Rudolph Giuliani's command. I mean, literally at this point, that's what it would take. Got to invade Comet Pizza. It's a reciprocal arrangement.
Those
Which brings us to the
bastards
Norman.
deserve it.
Which brings us to the Normandy comment, because now this is a much more serious thing. The Normandy comment. I'm sure you guys saw this when Trump got up onto a podium and actually said that, quote, the Kurds didn't help us at Normandy.
Yes, they actually did. They sent 44 companies.
Wait. This reminds me of an
Wait,
art.
no, really?
They sent 44 companies to fight in World War II, yes.
So wait.
Wow,
I think
so
we've seen.
not only is he actually wrong, but he's also ridiculous. That's brilliant. That's actually
Ha-
brilliant.
They
Has
were
anyone
literally
s-
most of the Iraqi volunteers.
Surreal, absolutely
You'll never
surreal.
know.
And you know who didn't really help very much in World War II?
The
America?
Iraqis.
No, I'm not going to do that. That'll be a cheap shot. Saudi Arabia. Saudi
Yeah, they
Arabia
actually
didn't do
sold
very
more
much.
oil to the Germans than us.
I know, right? So this is the curious thing. Saudi Arabia is apparently like really high on Trump's list of like people he loves and adores massively, despite the fact that he ran an election on not liking Islamic fundamentalists, but whatever. And the Kurds, who he claims did not help at Normandy, even though they sent 40 companies, somehow
Well, not to
are really
Normandy,
help-
but to the
to the Second World War
European
in
theater,
general.
yeah.
Yeah, to the theater in general. But no, this is what makes it really funny as well, because you know there's gonna be some MAGA people out there who are gonna be like writing in the comments on this stream, correcting like, well, technically it wasn't actually at Normandy. Totally missing the point, right? The point is going totally over their head. But yeah,
You already know the
Oh.
picture that I want to send for that.
yeah,
Actually.
actually. So I mean, it's really amazing. So that was a ridiculous comment as well. I mean, from any angle you turn and look at this, it becomes ridiculous.
Yeah.
Side note, I actually asked to appear on Academic Agent stream to debate him on the issue of the need for national liberation for the Kurdish people, and he declined to have me talk to him on that issue because, hold on, how did he phrase it? He said, yeah, he declined to have me talk to him on that issue because he said that I would only be coming there to bring him the opinion of the establishment British media. And I was just like, what?
Implying that he is not the establishment.
Implying that he does not consist of part of the establishment. This is something that's been going on for 2 years now, in which apparently I'm part of the establishment, but he, who is in academia, is not part of the establishment.
He
Really?
literally keeps voting for the establishment, and he fucking said it too.
It's the most surreal thing. It is the most surreal thing. So I don't know if he's actually listening to this stream or if someone will direct him to this particular part of the stream. But I mean, we need to have a debate on that too one day. Which one of us is actually more establishment? He who is in academia or me who is not?
I don't know. Wait.
I
Why
wouldn't say that just because he's in academia, he's in the establishment, because then I would have to say that my professor's in the establishment, and I know that he definitely is.
Yeah, this is true. I'm being a little bit reductionist there. It's possible to be in academia but not be part of the establishment. But still,
So wait.
like on the scale of establishment to non-establishment, I don't know. I would assume that he's more in it than I am, or at
That's
least that
fair.
people would regard that to be the case.
Still, what's the point if establishment happens to be right on some
And also, yeah,
on
also
certain
that's another
issue?
thing. No, you're right also on that, McClure, because obviously sometimes the establishment is correct. In fact, many times the establishment is correct on basic issues. So, for example, let's say that Joseph Biden got up tomorrow morning, and obviously, I have some problems with Joseph Biden, which we'll talk about in some other stream at some point in time, but not as many problems as I have with, say, Donald J. Trump. But let's say that Joseph Biden got up tomorrow morning and was like, do you know what, guys? I think the sky is blue.
No, it's actually green.
When this is not overcast, you're just going to have like all these MAGA people and like, the entire populist right is going to come out and be like, no, we decided actually that it's green. Literally. So, I mean, there is that.
Well, I have nothing to disagree here. It's completely correct.
Okay.
The
So anyway,
liberals have been lying to us all along.
yeah, little did we know. Little did we know it was actually green after all.
So
And then, of course,
see.
you would also have some people following it up with the typical riposte, which is that, oh, so then, why do we need to have, green technology with the sky itself is already green or whatever? Ridiculous things. I'm actually looking forward to this because the winter season is coming soon, or at least we're in the winter season just about now, right? Because we're kind of like on that boundary between autumn and winter. It's coming up
Yeah.
because September is when it kind of
I'm
ends.
going to snow again.
Sort of like, wake me up when September ends and we're in winter, basically, right? So we're going to get into winter, and then we're going to have the usual festivities that will occur, which will be like, cavalcades of just like far-right conservatives coming out and telling you that since they had snow on their lawn,
Yeah,
global warming no
exactly.
longer exists or something, right? It's just not there anymore. So, I mean, we'll deal with that when we get to it. So, part 4. 4 out of 6. I mean, we're doing pretty well here. Look at the time. Say, yeah, we've not been doing too badly. We can probably wrap this up within the appropriate time. By the way, the other thing I'll say to you all is you all have been absolutely fantastic guests. So I think we'll be having like all of you back again at some point. Like
Thank
literally
you.
probably the next stream. So you guys can come on anytime you want. Great stuff. It's happening here. So we've got point 4, which is, since we've been talking about him anyway, point 4 is literally titled Academic Agent Cigar Streams. Is it a far-right echo chamber? Now, I mean, the answer to that is obviously yes. So let's discuss the ways in which it is a far-right echo chamber, because this is something where I want to sort of get on a little bit of a soapbox here and say that I called this in the year 2017, and that there are people who are walking around right now, and I'm not going to say that it's like PSA Sitch and Adam Friended, but I have just said that it's them. Who thought that it would be really funny to mock me for having accurately predicted everything in 2017. Because I guess they didn't know that I was going to turn out to be completely correct. Since then, not a single man jack has come to apologize to me to tell me that, guess what, I was completely correct about Academic Agent streams. I was completely correct about the direction he was going in. I was completely correct about the direction the Deep Lore would end up in. In fact, in 2017, I predicted that within 2 years, they will be making apologetics for indentured servitude and slavery.
As
And
the first,
where are we now? We're in 2019, exactly 2 years later, and what are they doing?
as the first, I'd like to be the first man to apologize to Ray. I'm sorry that you were right. I should have listened.
There
I
we
was
go.
barely involved in this.
Thank you, Vault. You're always welcome on my streams, obviously, and it's very good that many people are now waking up to the fact that, I mean, I will admit sometimes that occasionally I will overestimate the depths of depravity that some groups will sink to. So there occasionally I will sort of overstate the case, right, and I'll have to kind of walk it back a little bit.
Probably.
In this particular case, I did not overstate it. So we are
So
now
how
at
they
the
got?
point. We're now at
So
the point
how
where I'm
they?
sure. No, go on.
Sorry. So, wait, since they were libertarians and AdCabs, you know that Walter Block justified indentured servitude on a voluntary basis?
They tried to quote that to me as well. They were doing all kinds of strange things. And so on this stream they
I'm
had
going
yesterday.
to do the main counter argument that the U.S. Libertarian Party uses and call him a fake libertarian. So,
Yeah, no,
wrecked
I would
liberal
even be willing.
tab.
No, I would even be willing to entertain that idea. The idea that these people are fake libertarians, because I've been referring to this whole thing as semi-feudal, basically. And the reason I've been calling it that is because if you actually look at the server, and we're going to get to this later on down, because I think the next 2 talking points are basically kind of about that too.
Oh joy!
But I mean, when we saw this echo chamber developing, what ended up happening? The first thing that we saw that was kind of strange, that kind of indicated this was all going in the wrong direction, was the influx of like Catholic traditionalists into the fold, and then no one kind of pushing back on them, like, well, what part of that is libertarian? Like, what part of libertarianism involves like having the Pope tell you what to do? I mean, it sounds kind of like a little bit
I don't know.
odd to me. Like, I mean, it's possible perhaps you could have a libertarian who happens to be a Catholic, but you can't have a libertarian who wants to implement a literal theocracy. I mean,
Most
that's a fundamental difference.
most guys at the Mises Institutes are Catholics.
Yeah,
but
that's why I draw that distinction, because I'm talking about those guys who are libertarians who happen to have Catholic faith, but then you have the people who follow around with Academic Agent who, when asked, "Do you want to implement a theocracy?" they will respond to you and tell you that they do, and that is a totally different issue.
Yeah, I think Hayek was Catholic too.
But he never advocated for a theocracy.
Oh, where's Hayek? Where you need him right now? I forgot he's dead.
I mean, his
Poor
book's
guy.
on my shelf, so.
Do you have the
Get it if you
Constitution?
want.
Do you have the Constitution of Liberty?
No, I have Road to Serfdom.
That's Constitution of Liberty is a better book.
I wanted
But-
to go ahead and start with Road to Serfdom.
But either way, wait. Since we're talking, this is a good moment right now to compare the far right to, let's say, Hayekian neoliberalism and what they have to say about society.
they're now completely different. Even though they claim to have started from that position, they now strike me as being completely different. Like if you were to come from 2005 libertarian wonderland, basically, and I say that in a non-derogatory way because obviously I had the privilege or disprivilege, depending on how you look at it, of watching that develop in the early 2000s. So I mean, there are plenty of admirable people involved in that, and there were obviously plenty of admirable people with admirable ideas, right? Ways of developing capitalism in a way that is more just and coherent.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the nicest way that I can describe it, right? So I think if
Right.
you were to take those people now and you were to bring them into 2019, or even many of those people are still around right now. I mean, Chicago Liberal himself might be one of them. You might actually be one of them also. And you were to sort of put them in the presence of these people and say, okay, what do these guys have in common with you? You guys might come to the conclusion that these guys have nothing whatsoever in common with you now, and they should perhaps be stopped from using the terminology or the naming convention that actually rightfully belongs to you guys. This was something I also had as a conversation with Geo-Libertarian George. I don't know whether you guys have met him, where
I
he believes in
have.
land value tax and so on. And he was having this conversation with me, and I hope someone will actually point out to him that this stream happened, that I mentioned him, right?
I
Notice me,
will.
senpai. But I was having a conversation with him, and he said to me that these people should not have the right to refer to themselves as liberals or libertarians if they're going to be defending indentured servitude and slavery, right? I mean,
So
I found
man,
that to be a pretty reasonable statement because, I
we
mean, for all the quarrels that a person could have with libertarians or liberals, you can't. I mean, it would be one of those things where it would be kind of, going beyond the bounds to say that liberals or libertarians in modern society would be expected to support that kind of thing. And we saw, and I'm not just just creating this out of nowhere. I mean, we actually saw this being discussed in last night's cigar stream that Academic Agent had, in which he brought on a bunch of guests, and they all sat there and very calmly talked about ways in which they would implement indentured servitude and basically hook people into debt slavery on purpose. Like, who would want to do that on purpose?
oh man,
Evidently,
why did he
academic
change?
agents.
So let's see. To bring it back to Ron Hayek, Hayek, he was somewhat a fusionist. Like he understand that tradition can operate. Tradition is important as a operative way to discipline free society or whatever. But he's also was against this type of paternalism. That people that the academic agent have on the streams. Like they're offering, like, yeah, we need the state to be this paternal institution as a way to guide people. In a way, is a more cynical worldview than a liberal or even a Marxist, because they all advocate for like we want freedom. Freedom is an end of itself. That freedom should come from certain arrangements within society, while they want to impose this type of this big brother attitude over you. In some ways, they're more cynical. They're more cynical than you, Ray. Just
Maybe.
Um,
And so this is one of those things where at some point I think, I don't know if I can do something to facilitate this, but at some point all of you need to get into an engagement with the people who are presently in his server and in other servers who believe similar things as well, because I didn't encounter this kind of weird stuff just in his. The first place I actually found this stuff being said was actually in the Distributed server, believe it or not. And also I witnessed some really incredibly weird stuff going on also in True Dill Tom's server back when that actually existed.
Oh, that's still around. Speaking of that, are you
that still
familiar
exists?
with? Yeah, but Trillo Tom, we all know he was, for people who don't know, he was an Australian YouTuber. He was getting interested in more postmodern political analysis. So he got into, let's say, formalism. For people who don't know what formalism is, I say go to Mencius Moldbug Unqualified Reservation website to get a take on formalism. But so afterwards there was this guy calls himself Imperious. Swords took over the server, and that was on there. And I had some people down there too, and just said this is just this cult, almost like this cult mentality. Is more like how it was the behavior. It was like stay in line, this kind of thing. you need to, if Imperius is talking to you, he's basically just testing you to see like what type of man, what type of person you are, whether you can stand up to him or you're just so weak. It's just that testing. He can be like all paternal,
sounds like-
nurturing, encouraging, but also can really break you down psychologically speaking.
He
That's
sounds
what
like the
he
kind
did.
of person who would be really damaging to have like in the middle of your community, because he might actually just turn around and destroy your
It's-
everything.
That's the thing. That's the thing he did to Dylan, or I mean Chulotan. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Because he was like, he basically said, "You're nothing without me. I'm just," and Dilton just say, yeah, he's a natural leader, but people who know Dilton, he was kind of, I don't want to say submissive, but just he was a shy guy. He was not he didn't feel like he was really meant to lead anyone. He felt like, imperious or just it
can
was
also-
like this.
We can also pivot from there as well into Chicago Liberals topic, the one that he wanted to cover, which again was one that I actually suggested in the first place because of an interesting debate that had happened a long time ago.
I shouldn't,
How the
I
far
shouldn't
right
have said
became
that.
anti-trade. Now, I mean, let me just give some background on this because I'm sure that people want to know how he ended up even coming to this conclusion. But there I was in the Deep Lore server, which is a place no one should actually be. But for some reason, I was there. So we were
My
having some
condolences.
conversation. I know, right? So we were having a conversation. I had just finished having a conversation on Twitter as well after I had been on like Jake from Bible Reloaded's thing where he was like criticizing me for various things, all of which were ridiculous. But so I was pointing out that one of the ways to solve the problem that people keep talking about in the context of the Americas, knowing that the Americas is kind of like a weird free-for-all land because of the fact that the people who presently run the governments in these places were not originally from the Americas. And I said, the one way to deal with this issue without having to do immensely disruptive things or without having to do things that are blatantly going to be, uphill battles, is you could come to a conclusion that there should be a continental border and a continental trade regime and a continental common border perimeter and a customs union, and additionally, the right to freedom of movement within that continent, the continent of the Americas, so this would include North America and South America and parts of the Caribbean, or all of the Caribbean if you like. And the reason why this would be actually something of great importance and goodness is because, first off, you would actually lessen the need for people to migrate because of the fact that foreign direct investment into the countries which have hitherto been deprived of that investment because of the fact that they've been behind regimes that do not want to engage in trade, or because there are just like too many tariff and non-tariff barriers in the way of effective trade between these groups, these would all be eroded by agreement, right? So companies would be able to invest in these locations. People would then be able to have productive work in the locations, in the towns in which they live. And then they would no longer have the particular need to migrate for economic reasons because the wealth would have actually come to them through foreign direct investment. And then we also have the second prong of this progressive development, which would be that the freedom of trade and the freedom of movement would mean that in particular badly administered regimes, of which there are many in the Americas, people would be able to vote with their feet to just go to the place next door or go to the country next door through whatever means is necessary, given that it would no longer be illegal to travel. And they would be able to escape from their dictator to go somewhere else if the dictator is behaving badly. So in that particular case, it then creates a sort of reverse incentive for governments to actually behave in ways that are accommodating to their citizens, such as having reasonable levels of taxation as opposed to high, ridiculous taxation, right? And to provide services within a certain, within a certain amount that cater to people who need them, and at the same time to also have an industrial strategy that involves providing productive work for all and for having wages set at a level of which they can buy the products which they produce. And the reason they would want to do this is because no one's going to want to live in the country if you don't do that, right? So you're incentivizing positive effects all around. Now, obviously, a whole bunch of people became offended by this and said that I was sort of destroying the concept of what the Americas are supposed to be about. And I'm thinking, well, was the Americas really supposed to be about people living in regimes of complete poverty and with artificial borders drawn around them, which they can't move out of?
I think
I don't think so,
America.
right?
I think America was supposed to, build its own identity and kind of cast off the chains of the old world. Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. And so from that, we came to the conclusion that the reason why you've got the far right people now who are supporting Donald Trump, who previously had not been doing so, or you've got people complaining about trade or complaining about having what the idea of having a continental trade arrangement would be, the covert reason for their complaint is because despite the fact that they know these things are economically a good idea, and they know that free trade produces positive results for everyone involved in the long term, is because they have some kind of weird animus against people of color. And so since they know that people of color would mutually benefit along with them from this trade, they are now somehow weirdly against it. And they're having to come up with increasingly more complicated reasons to explain why trade is actually now suddenly bad.
So
I mean, do you
are
agree
we
that's where they're coming from?
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's bring it back around the 90s, like when the paleo conservative movement was actually a thing. Also, just to show myself, I actually spoke to one of these people. His name is Paul Goffrey. Check out my interview with him on my channel.
Yes.
Intelligent man. But also, let's bring it back to like the paleo conservative movement. You got people like Patrick J. Buchanan, Murray Rothbard, like they all form like this coalition. This coalition say, hey, they just agreed on that America sort of need to withdraw from the world after the Cold War, after the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And you have this move, and they broke together because they disagreed over trade. Buchanan, who I know, was a arch protectionist, but I think the thing is that the disagreement or dispute of trade is a result of lost manufacturing. That manufacturing was such a big part for the American economy and the way of life that you're basically guaranteed a job for a lifetime, as it was almost seen as a social safety net. But with the disappearance of that, with the rise of the knowledge economy, the rise of computers and data technology, basically just making, basically innovating productivity or whatever, that's going out the window, and they wanted to blame someone. They wanted to blame people like on Mexico or on China for the disappearance of jobs. But
The
you
blame
also
game
see,
always comes in.
but it's just the reality is the reason why we also need to keep in mind is that I'm from Michigan. People don't like NAFTA, but it was just generally the collapse of the automotive industry. It wasn't due to free trade, but it was just the collapse. It may have been due to recession or internal problem with those companies have. That's my interpretation why the far right, at least the American far right, are against globalization and free trade.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't seem to understand. They just don't seem to understand the economics of it. And they're not thinking in the long term. They're just thinking that, okay, well, they don't want to have change now. I mean, when do they want to have change? Do they want to have it later when it's too late for them to learn the new skills for the new economy? Because eventually America is not going to be a manufacturing hub for middle level manufacturing forever. It's going to become like a service economy that has some high level manufacturers going on. I mean, this is something that we saw the Cato Institute cover a long time ago with a comedic video which they did, which was aimed at Bernie Sanders, but could also equally apply to Trump on this particular issue, in which they brought on a woman who has an accent which I found was remarkably similar to mine. But so that made it even more funny. But she came on and she said, you have a high level of sort of of human development in the United States. Let's call it human development. Very high on the Human Development Index because American children go through quite a significant amount of education, have quite a significant amount of money invested in them, and are being sort of churned out of schools with reasonably fantastic skills, and they have sort of world-beating corporations like Google comes from the United States, Microsoft, all of these companies. I mean, I don't have to bother actually listing them. I can just list a whole bunch of Silicon Valley and some Seattle stuff, and you guys get the picture of where I'm going there.
Yeah.
all of these things are products of basically like American ingenuity and innovation. And it's just one of these weird streams where I'm actually like praising America for something amazing, right? But anyway,
I'm fine with that.
so I mean, these are amazing innovations, and obviously it was a direction that was coming from far off. This isn't something that just happened in the 1990s. This was something that was happening in the 80s and the 70s and so on. It's part of the reason as to why the United States was such a strong contender during the Cold War. I mean, Russia, by contrast, had many ideas but was unable to implement them because of the fact that because the crony economy that was being operated there was not geared toward actually actualizing things. A lot of people get this one wrong, where they think the reason for the problems in Russia, for example, was that people weren't inventing things. No, they invented things. They could just never actually get them to market because there wasn't really a proper market. In the United States, of course, they had both of these things down pat. They had the ability to create people who were inventive and willing to be free to imagine things that could be possible, and they also had the means through which to bring these things to market. But totally different subject. I just wanted to put that out there. So
command versus. Sorry.
No, go on.
About to say command versus spontaneity, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Command versus spontaneity.
And but Ray,
so with all of this going on, the question the woman asked, which was a really poignant question, was when you've achieved this level of development to the point where you're designing Boeing airplanes, okay, Boeing aircraft, and you're designing. You have things like Google, Microsoft. You have like really high-end, specialized manufacturing that's going on in the United States. Does anyone think that it would be a productive use of Americans' time to be producing snow globes?
But Ray,
stuffed toys. No, right? Like no one thinks that would be a productive use of American time.
Everybody's bored.
Except
we want to talk about something.
Hold on. Except the far right, who for some bizarre reason thinks that it would be fulfilling for working class Americans to create snow globes and plastic toys. Why? Why not let people who are lower down on the Human Development Index and are now catching up have the opportunity to have those jobs instead so that they can build their own industries on that? For example, I mean, if someone wants to produce snow globes, maybe they could produce snow globes in Myanmar or Vietnam or perhaps in Malaysia. Well, perhaps not even Malaysia, because Malaysia might be beyond snow globes at this point. But you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
And this is not to disrespect those countries that are at the level where they have to produce snow globes. Everyone has to produce a snow globe at some point in time, right? And eventually you grow out of that and you don't have to produce those things anymore. And then the next country gets to experience the prosperity that comes from building the light industries first and then developing the medium and the heavy ones, right? So, eventually the snow globes will come from, some country in Africa, for example, maybe Botswana or something. And then they will become also onto the ladder of progressive, productive economic growth. And then they too will become wealthy and, experience a service economy, perhaps. These are the things where, you have that hope and you go out there and you set things in motion. So I don't understand why people on the far right are so, and by far right, again, I mean sort of the traditionalist right, protectionist right. I don't understand why these people are so hell-bent on basically just like doing really dumb things and then like acting like they're profound in some way. There is something profound about setting up tariffs deliberately so that you can produce snow globes among a population group that is educated to the university level. That makes no sense at all.
But
actually in Chicago right now, it's funny that you mentioned this because there used to be this large steel mill called the Southworks, and it's since been demolished. So right now they're actually going to be building a high-tech area in the former region so that it would actually help the economy in the region.
That's
also going to turn it into a tourist area.
But Ray, I'm an old man yelling at modernity, so why are you listening to me anyway?
Well, no, you're on the same page with me on this, I think, right? Which is that you would rather have the people in your community producing producing things that are of high value rather than the things that are on the lower value chain.
I just say that America, reliance on spontaneity is the correct direction to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take. But really, man,
we are mostly in agreement on this then.
But really, man, why are you yelling? Why? Can you just let me yell at modernity and change? Like, can you just let me...
No! It's not allowed. I mean, I know, whenever people come onto my stream, they always go away slightly more progressive than when they first came there. It's an amazing effect I have. But no, you're not allowed to yell at modernity anymore.
I still hate modernity.
Right?
Speaking of modernity,
or at least if you have an issue with modernity, rather than going backwards, let's sort of see if we can go forward above and beyond modernity into post-modernity or post-modernity, right?
no. My view is that modernity failed at World War One. That's
Or,
my view.
I mean,
Yikes.
that is an argument that could be made as well. But I mean, it just means you need to go beyond it because going backwards is always the problematic element. If you're in the middle of something that's problematic, it's better to go forward out of it than to go backward out of it.
Although I agree with Max Weber that bureaucracy is probably like the most efficient way to govern people now of a nation state. That's his theory of modernity. Marx, has his theories of modernity. And who's the third sociological guy of the 19th century has theories who wrote about modernity and sort of yelled at it as an old man? There's Karl Marx, Marx Weber.
Basically everyone.
Probably everyone. Are you thinking of Mikhail Foucault?
He
yelled at it, and he was kind of like an old person. He just didn't want to go backwards. He wanted to go forward.
The 20th century Nietzschean? No, he's not. He doesn't deserve to be called a Nietzschean.
Actually, 20th century? Maybe not 20th.
You said you said Foucault?
Actually, yeah, Foucault. Yes, he would be.
Yeah,
he would be.
He's a 20th century. Yeah, he's not.
Of course he would be. Yeah. I've been drinking too much wine at this point.
Yeah, what, you've been drinking this entire time? No, that's why you're so lucid.
I'd be drinking this entire time.
Always drunk. She is a fucking alcoholic. This is an intervention. You have a fucking problem.
Wait,
Says the stoner who has been high on weed for 24 hours straight.
I am at peak streaming performance right now. This is what peak streaming performance looks like.
Yeah, you know what? You're a fucking alcoholic. And you always have been. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's just saying.
Brilliant.
So who's this?
But you know what? Kudos for being a functional addict.
Right. He's the French guy. His name is Emile Durkheim.
Oh, Durkheim. Okay.
Yeah, Weber, Marx. Two Germans. Basically, one is an idealist, one is a materialist, and one is somewhere in between.
Leave it to the Germans to complain about society. Am I right?
Well, my guy complained. Well, my guy Friedrich Nietzsche, my profile picture, he's the one that pretty much, put me pretty much.
That wasn't the German that I was talking about.
Look, this is one of those things which I think that basically, if I were to compare people in the world, okay, I think that you've got the British people, you've got the German people, you have the Korean people, and the Japanese people. And what these societies all seem to have in common, particularly in this era, is that we design these intricate societies that are kind of like gigantic torture chambers, okay? Yeah, everything that happens is basically a gigantic torture chamber. And then what we do is we come up with criticisms of the torture chamber, which we ourselves have in fact designed.
So we're going Foucault. We're going full Foucault now. Having post societies on control, that kind of thing.
Full Foucault. Never go full Foucault. Well, actually, no. No. But I mean, no. On a serious note, though, I mean, there is something to that.
Societies of control. I think that's something nonsense. Yes.
There should be a stream on that eventually, because I mean, I'm relatively neutral on the position, so it's one of those things where basically I think that stuff that Foucault said was interesting, but I'd be sort of open to obviously critiques of stuff.
Yeah. So just to make it quick, he has a rather ahistorical view of the medieval period and how they, enforced discipline. It's been thoroughly disputed. That was the basis of his critique of society, based on discipline. He was a radical critic of discipline, and being that, I just find that to be rather impractical at the end of the day. If you compare it to someone who's more practical and more grounded, like someone like a liberal like Hayek. Well, Foucault was also a liberal too, but that's not here nor. But someone who's a political liberal like Hayek, who understand that you sort of need to have that type of discipline to make society go round and round. Plus post societies of control. It's easier just to assume that the world is just chaotic and rudderless than just saying these are the mechanisms of society that imposing on us and holding us back. But that's not it's just such a surface level of analysis when things are just utterly random.
Well, I mean,
That's-
that is something can also be taken into account. That yes, sometimes people describe a thing, and then those who have done the thing aren't aware of what they have done. So I mean,
that's
there's always that
a-
ambiguity in there. Which is, did the person really design it to actually operate this way, or has it just fallen into that
but
position by some form of
but
luck?
how they present it is more like this is more of a fact. This is more of a consequence. But
Hmm.
I consciously reject
I
that.
think that there's an element of what Foucault says though that has to be taken in terms of a timeline. That perhaps originally the thing that you're saying, which is that these things happen to fall into effect in that way because they happen to be most effective, or by literally luck, could have been a thing. But then after we passed through this kind of threshold of the late 1970s and to the mid 1980s, there came to be a point where I think that government officials and people who are academics or people who are in business administration and so on kind of sat down and thought to themselves, okay, based on our understanding of how society operates, how can we produce particular results by manipulating things which pre-existed?
Yeah, that's
This is
peak
how we end up.
liberalism right
This
there.
is how we end up. This is how we end up with yeah, because neoliberalism, which he talked about, was one of those things, which was basically, how do we create a kind of an inverse of what was originally described as heroic capitalism by basically using the state to create the preconditions for capitalist growth. And so Foucault talked about that a lot, but I think that can be applied in some other ways as well. So, for example, let's look at this thing where you have a phenomenon that we've been witnessing recently, particularly on social media, where you have some people who don't actually believe in a particular religion, but will nevertheless promote that religion to others on the basis that it produces particular structural effects which are of economic benefit to themselves. Right? We've seen that play out. So I'm not going to name names on this, but there are some people who have been doing this.
Yes.
Now, if we've rewinded to like say the 1920s, or even like let's say we rewinded to the beginning of the 1800s or something, you would find almost no people doing that because the people who would be advocating those things would be most likely fully invested in actually believing these things themselves. And so in that scenario, perhaps Foucault's criticisms or some expositions would not apply because they're sincere believers. It just so magically happened that it turned out that way. But if you fast forward far enough into the future, you eventually have people who have a form of rational cynicism in which they're doing what they're doing on purpose, but they no longer believe in it.
Yes.
And in that case, then you could then say that okay, this is about discipline and the creation of power structures, right?
Yeah. Just also, the other thing with Foucault was there's another aspect I find to be interesting in how he examined power relationship with with truth is almost like I don't want to say Marxian because that's not a good way to phrase it, but it's just more like this take that truth is more of a product of the power structures.
You
That's the
can't
thing.
handle the truth,
That
Frederick.
truth, like that's the thing, like power is that truth is that power. The forces behind power often determine to be truth. Like is like something like Marx said that the ideology of the bourgeois is meant
Oh
to
my god.
serve as the justification of their behavior, political structure, or superstructure, if you will,
Yes.
that kind of
I'm
thing.
actually really enjoying this, and I want to take Ray's terrible take on using Game of Thrones quotes, but do you all remember when Varys asked Tyrion, like, who truly has the most power? Is it the king,
Met
the
power
priest,
Mhm.
or,
were
because in terms of hiring a mercenary, who has the power? Well, the answer is the mercenary being hired, actually. It's all the
no like
power.
man only believes where power is reside.
Exactly,
It's a matter of
exactly.
perception. It's a matter of
Oh, you're
legitimacy, right?
turning me on. I love it. Continue.
Okay, that's got weird. Okay.
But I mean, obviously,
Don't
Uh,
what
worry.
you're saying here is obviously correct, of course.
yes. I'm not
Yeah, I'm
saying I
agreeing.
believe in it.
Varys was a really underrated character in that show, and I'm not gonna give spoilers because there might actually be someone in existence out
You
there who still
probably
knows what
fucking
happened.
relate to him so
But
bad.
Varys was, he was very underrated, and he was fantastic. I
I
think.
love, I love John. I love the Starks. I love Eddard Stark and Tyrion Lannister. Like, yeah. Also, it's kind of a shame how it ended.
Yeah,
Although,
I'm not
like,
sure what that rushed ending was all about. Well, I mean,
It's
I am sure of it. I mean, it made some coherent sense, but it was one of those things where I think that like it gave me that sense of like, and this happens in Japan quite a lot as well, but it gave me that sense of like you spent all of your money and then you came down to the end and your budget was like literally gone and you had to figure out how to end this thing.
oh man, they could have put. Oh man, HBO gave them the green light. They could have prolonged the season to 10 or 12 if they wanted
Yeah,
to, but they
yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to
The
end
thing
it.
that I found disappointing about that fact was when you consider that HBO, it was HBO, right?
Yeah,
That was where the money. Yeah. So I mean, when you consider it's literally HBO, it's not like they were actually short on money, right? It was kind of like an artificially imposed limitation. If that is the reason why they did it that way.
I think they just wanted to end. Like, you get kind of, if you're working on a project for the last 10 years of your life, and you get, hey, I kind of want to move on to other things. So why not end it quickly? But the thing is,
There's
the
also
character.
sometimes the problem of too much money as well, as we're seeing with Disney and they're handling the Star Wars franchise at the moment as
Yeah.
well, where they've almost encountered what's called Dutch syndrome, where they've got so much money that they're able to do things that actually are wrong.
Did someone say Dutch? Pass it.
I don't know.
Pass
Just
it.
like the problem with season 8 is the lack of fulfillment of the character arcs. It just didn't felt right in the end. Why did this particular person at the end became king for really no reason at all? Who was barely
Yeah,
involved in the
it was kind of
story.
like a dice roll. It was almost like a gigantic finger, sort of like shown to all of us on that one. Where it was just like,
So why?
really.
So why this person? Oh, speaking of Star Wars, this is a good analogy. The reason why people don't like the prequel trilogy is basically how jarring Anakin turning the dark side was. It was
Oh no
like
no no
there
no
was
no no no
practically
no.
no.
No, it's
There was
actually
there
because
was there
George
was
Lucas is
plenty of.
terrible at writing dialogue. That's
There's
really
also
it.
that, yeah, the dialogue was not that great, but no, there's a lot of people who say that, oh, the turn was sudden. The turn was not sudden. If you actually look back
I
to
know,
the
but
moment at which Qui-Gon Jinn actually takes Anakin from his mother, and his mother says to him in that moment, when you go, remember, you can't change the past, don't look back. A lot of people don't notice that as soon as she says that and he starts to walk away with Qui-Gon Jinn, he turns to look at her. So he did look back on the first day.
no, that's not.
And
Well,
so that was actually
I'm
the
just
beginning.
trying.
There's a lot of people who say that was actually secretly the beginning of his inevitable movement toward the dark side of the Force.
Okay, I give it that, but the analogy is that it was so sudden why this person, this unnamed person, became became a
It was
Hitler-like
me
figure.
all along.
Anakin's a clone.
It was fucking me. I'm Anakin. Holy shit! Fuck!
You're more like
Okay.
Ahsoka Tano.
Yes, I
Actually,
do remember her.
if we're gonna be honest, fuck, who is it? Ezra? No.
Oh, but
reiterate what we were about to do. So,
Yeah,
we
we were-
had the next thing that was going to happen, which was what was it? Harrowing experiences in far right Discord servers.
Oh boy.
Alright.
I came back
Alright.
just in time. Perfect.
Alright. My experience in a far right server. They didn't really treat me well. Said I was boring. And what they had to say on most things I heard before. And I was basically there was a hive. I wouldn't say a hive man, but it was just this in really informal sense that you knew that this guy needed to test you it was almost like a form of psychological manipulation, like placing, like suggesting that you need to be this, get this type of approval that you're good, just that kind of thing.
Yeah, it functions like mafia, basically, or like a cult of some sort.
Cult. Oh, the cult. Speaking of cults, you ever watch Always Sunny? Oh, wait, not Always Sunny. You ever watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
No,
You should. It's a good film.
I don't watch movies. Really.
Why you don't watch movies?
I don't know, I just find them boring.
Don't condemn the man. I feel him.
Do
Fuck
you watch
movies.
movies? Do you watch
Fuck
movies?
You know what? I don't care if I like movies or not. Fuck movies. I'm protesting for you, McClure. I'm here for you. Fuck
Thank
No,
you.
I just saying, like, you ever seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood though?
No, I can't say have.
Okay.
I'm actually really not up to date on like movies and such.
Okay, the movie is relevant, but you know about the
Thanks for the
Manson
follow,
family.
Chris.
You know about the Manson family, right?
Oh, those fuckers.
That TV show sitcom? No, I know. I know.
Actually, we talked about the serial killers.
Yes,
Technic-
I know.
Technically, Charlie didn't kill anybody.
Oh, please don't.
Well, we talked about his family, which definitely did.
We need to
I
get back
mean,
on topic though. The harrowing
Okay,
experiences.
Yes, mommy. Yes, mommy.
What did you guys see? Because I know that McClure was seeing some really incredibly insane things happening when he was in the Deplore server. Was that true?
Well, to be clear, I was never a part of the Deplore. I was only a sales executive.
Mhm.
But yeah, so but you know what I saw was basically like the hive mentality. These people are openly hostile to you. If you express any kind of disagreement, you are instantly going to be called a leftist. And really, everything except for a Nazi is a leftist to these people. And I'm not saying all of them are like that, but well, there are some exceptions. Like it's a vocal minority, I would say. And yeah, to be fair, a lot of that is just shit posting, and they are joking around. But at some point, jokes stop being jokes, and they become reality. If your entire life is a joke, then how can
I
we really
friggin'
distinguish?
agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, pretty much, 100% here. Like, big take. Seriously. For real.
I mean, they claim to be like libertarian or classical liberal, but when somebody says that, yeah, when somebody basically says that slavery is okay because slaves were well fed because they didn't starve, then
Oh
I
my
obviously will have some disagreements with that, because you could basically justify, I don't know, even the Holocaust by that. those
Pretty
standards.
much. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the
almost like
prisoners
a
are-
snowball effect.
Yes. Well, I basically think this is like a echo chamber, They basically filter out all of the bad ideas that are bad according to them, and somehow they only leave, people right to them on the political
Do you find this
spectrum.
really ironic in that they seem to make claims of this of the left all the time?
Well, it is also true with the left to a certain extent.
Oh,
I mean-
definitely it is.
Yes, but it's I really think that political opinions are also on the bell curve. So, there are not a lot of people who are extremely far right. There are not a lot of people who are extremely far left. But from my observations in recent years, we see that this bell curve is basically getting flattened, and there are more and more extreme people. I don't know. This can be explained by the internet and the creation of those echo chambers in recent years. I'm not 100% sure.
Hmm.
Or it could be just discontent, just polarization. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. It could be the result of the economic crisis of 2008 and shifting politics on the basis of identity. The reason why to partly explain the reason why you see the rise of populism in Western politics in general. Maybe that could explain why you see people veering off into these rather extreme categories.
Yeah.
So, is anyone else going to talk?
Yeah, it got a little bit silent.
It's hard to
Um,
argue with you, really. In all sincerity.
I mean, my experience in the deep lore was being able to go and meet the wonderful person known as Fascies.
Oh
That
man,
was a fun
Hashi.
time.
He called you an animal, Ray.
Yeah.
A mad animal.
What? Really?
Yes.
Who?
Oh
That's
my
amazing.
god!
I mean, I said jokes on him since, well, I'm of the more civilized world.
Yeah,
Well,
it's amazing. I don't know where these guys get their arrogance from on this issue.
Well, he basically is like a morality police of the deep lore, calling everyone degenerate, but I mean, his life is. He's not a saint, let's just put it this way.
He's literally going to be like the first one put in a fucking gas chamber.
Jesus, help us all. Thank you.
I thought, hey, so basically, like, come on, man, let me be a macho man. Wait, are you telling me you're an incel, dude? Dude?
LOL!
Well, he's not an incel, but he claims
He's
to
probably
be
a
Catholic,
weak.
so maybe he should be actually.
Wait, he's a Catholic?
Yes, he's Irish, and therefore.
Oh, never mind.
Well, at least
never
I'm
mind.
of the
He's
nation
not
that has food.
So let me just be a macho man. Just be the macho man. Like, I say really edgy and borderline, more questionably moral thing, but at the end of the day, I'm like this macho man, savage.
I really think
what?
that
I believe you.
Okay. I really think that the more important problem is with other servers that more people have access to, like deep lore without the in front of the deep lore, because you have a lot of people coming from AA streams, and they obviously aren't as radicalized, and what they see is all of those fascist comments and so on, and they basically try to fit in and get radicalized by those people. And as I said, it's a vocal minority, probably. Most of them are still like classical libertarians, but through the lack of moderation, we are just seeing a growing faction of far-right people in the deep lore.
I mean, that's growing faction also basically as AA himself at this point. He's basically not even following his older beliefs. I mean, if you've ever seen his stream, Who Is and Isn't a Classical Liberal, which, ironically, he actually makes fun of Ray at the very start, but now has become the very thing he's sworn to destroy.
Fucking obsessed. He's so obsessed. I get so fucking mad about it.
I'm
mean-
telling
Please
you,
do not interrupt me, by the way.
they kind of like view me as some kind of like arch nemesis type character or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
like
you
it's like-
are.
it's like you're
not
the
as a
Antichrist,
narrative,
which
they
is
know.
hilarious.
Ray, have you
basically
ever
like I'm the Antichrist or something for them.
Ray, you ever seen that clip from Vince McMahon from WWE saying, like, he basically said, you bought it. Even my immediate family bought it. Just
It's
like,
absolutely brilliant.
yeah, man. I wish I can show that clip right now, but I don't want your stream to be taken down.
Yeah, you might get a copy. Yeah, it'll produce a copyright problem. So no, people cannot show videos until we can figure out how exactly to do it without getting copyright hit. Maybe if it was on
Mommy
BitChute,
will
it'd be
be
easier.
angry if you fuck up.
Every time you try
Right.
to have a conversation with those people, they always, I don't know, make your claims sound ridiculous and always take the worst kind of interpretation of your words.
Yeah, they do that on purpose.
Did I ever
sure
tell
they-
you guys how I got banned from Deep Lore?
No. you
I
haven't.
told
No, please
Fascius
tell.
to follow his own fucking rules.
Yeah, he considers himself like he's literally immune to his own rules, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, to me it's almost sad. Like, I haven't acted that way since 5th grade. And I think Fascius is even older than I am.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
is.
Is he a boomer?
Probably.
Probably.
Oh no.
I think most people in Deep Lore are boomers at this point.
Yeah.
Oh god, they're
We
like
had
the
to-
4chan leftover generation
Well-
that got kicked out by the neo-Nazi generation.
Yeah, it's like what we call neo boomers basically, which is where
Boomers that discovered the internet.
yeah, where they've basically been born. They've been basically born after the time is already gone, but they're kind of like nostalgic for a time period they never lived in and definitely wouldn't want to live in. And so they're now basically recreating that gigantic torture chamber and trying to force the rest of us to live in it when they wouldn't even survive 5 seconds in it themselves.
And I would also like to add that a lot of people in that community are just a bunch of edgy boys, and they will try to defend every single possible idea that is just basically viewed as a disgusting idea by majority
Yeah.
of population.
You even get like ridiculous things where these guys are outside terms of service because they're engaging in like calls to violence, for example, where I asked them like basic things on basic civil rights questions, and they will always take the most extreme and ridiculous response.
Yes.
It's honestly kind of sad.
I also
And then
disagree
they do
with
this
you
thing
guys
where they
on...
create this weird bubble chamber as well, where they act like their completely whack opinions are somehow the norm, and that everyone else who's like, this is kind of weird. No, everyone who says it's weird apparently is the weird ones. It's bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I also disagree on some stuff with you guys, but I mean, I try to be civil and I don't know, have rational discussion and just not
Believe
being
me,
there.
we all appreciate it.
Hmm.
And those guys just like to argue.
You're not even that good at it.
And yeah, if I'm not very responsive, I'm sorry, but it's like 6 a.m. here. That's why.
Yeah, it's no
Oh,
problem.
don't worry about it, man.
We're coming up to the end now anyway, because the part 6 now is basically retaking spaces for openness in virtual media domains. So, I mean, it's quite obvious. We've talked about many things that are wrong with these communities and how basically since 2016, or perhaps before, but I mean, they've been in overdrive since 2016, really. But, we're talking about how since that time, we've seen like some real crazy stuff happening. And it's only become worse and worse over time. The question then becomes, how do we take things back to the way that they should be?
I don't really have a good answer. I don't think it's possible.
Lots and lots of seducing Nazis, personally. That's my take.
No.
Wow, not even
Coming
a
off the
laugh?
Coming off
Come
the process, Dan, I was thinking, wait, what? No.
on!
So since that is obviously not the appropriate solution.
I mean,
Well,
okay, Oh, if we're talking appropriate or effective, because I guarantee you.
Appropriate and effective.
Oh, it has to be
Uh,
both? Well, excuse me, none. I'll be over here with my hot takes.
what? That doesn't make sense.
I think we can like retake the space if if we are able to be more compelling than they are, because they've been compelling so far because of the fact that they knew where to go. They knew where to go with their stuff, which was that they went to YouTube at a point in time when like very few people.
Whoopsie, accident. That was an accident. That
No,
wasn't
it's
it.
no problem. No, it's no problem. That just they basically like don't explain. But um uh what was I saying? Oh yes, they knew where to go at the time when they jumped in to YouTube at the time, and they went onto Twitch, and they went into all these other social media areas that previously had not been inhabited, or at least with as much vigorousness or as much personableness as people in the legacy media had, because previously you couldn't like interact directly with people in the legacy media, whereas obviously these guys like Saga of Akkad and all of these other people who came along after them using the same kind of model, they were more like personable and interactive, and they kind of like had this whole hobbyist looking thing going on where they would take super chats and so on, and they would like be among the people and so on, and that was how they were able to kind of like roll everyone with these ideas. And so I think a strike bag, or a way of taking back the space, would be would be if we had a scenario in which people from the center and people from the left all came together and agreed that it would be a great idea to actually reuse some of these same tactics, just going in the other direction, and return some sanity to the political discourse.
I don't
mean,
really know how
that's a
effective
good
that
idea.
would be. I don't know if anyone would like to watch that.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean-
that's the main problem, which is that the growth path for trying to do that is significantly more difficult. I mean, we've seen people like Vosh who have been sort of successful in accomplishing that. I'm trying to think of anyone else.
I mean, they,
What?
Destiny was mildly successful, but he became like a problematic figure in the process of doing so. I'm talking about in terms of just numbers here, right? So I mean,
Okay,
it's
fair.
possible to do it. It is possible to do it.
you
Fair,
know,
fair.
most of them got so popular because of their edginess.
Yeah, no, but I don't mean like edgy in a rightward direction. So I mean, obviously, you can be slightly edgy within a leftward direction or in a center direction instead.
I
Yeah,
don't
but-
know.
Like edgily advocate
Sometimes,
for things that are right instead of edgily advocating for
I
things that
mean,
are horrible.
you can advocate for things that are right and still do heavy damage. Like, and if we're gonna talk about Vosh here, I have a really strong distaste for him because of the language he used to basically say you should all hate trans people and use the quote unquote avatars that trans people with dysphoria use because they don't like showing their real face because they get harassed by
Did
fucking
they?
said people.
Did he ever end up apologizing to them for
No.
that later?
No. He's also made multiple
Amazing.
takes where he's made comments about, people being mentally ill, and then he'll like just casually be like, "I'm autistic, it's okay." And it's
What?
like, "No, it's actually not okay, Bosh. It's not okay. I don't
Wait,
care if you're autistic."
who's Vosh?
Oh, you don't want to know.
Oh,
Trust
sweet
me.
summer child.
But do you people actually think that this is solely a right-wing problem? I mean,
I think the real solution is to just
Man
more
needs
of
to let go of his pride.
we also
That
see
is it.
some left-wing groups going, on the streets and beating up random people or calling everyone fascist for.
All the time, and half the time I call them infiltrators because they're actually trolls pretending and trying to make leftists look bad. But in the other times, it's usually young people just getting into politics. They kind of take everybody's word for everything and make their hot takes based on that instead of like reading stuff and stuff.
Yeah,
So it's
everyone
pretty.
needs to basically, on that note, yeah, I mean, you're going in the right direction there. That basically everyone needs to calm down a bit.
also education will help, like just political education.
Immensely.
And yeah, political education. There's obviously been a failure in political education across the board, also. Which in 2011, Zbigniew Brzezinski talks about that in a segment where he went on to a morning show on MSNBC, and they asked him, what was the biggest failure that he thinks is going to really come back to bite America later on. And obviously, he was talking about America specifically, but this could apply elsewhere too. And he said, the biggest failure is the lack of political education. And because of that lack of political education, there's going to be unpredictably bad results later on.
To
Could we
clarify,
call it a
he
failure?
he was the National Security Advisor under Jimmy Carter.
Mhm.
I wouldn't call it a failure. I'd call it a successful tactic of the right to keep people uneducated.
Or that too is something which is worth mentioning, because we're talking about a society in which they had actually been not really paying attention to these to appropriately remunerating teachers and all this kind of stuff for quite a long time. Like, the United States has had an issue with the way that the school system operates, and they hadn't actually been fixing it.
Oppressing. I am just rambling here. I'm just kind of tired of the obvious sabotage to education, especially to those of different race or poverty. It just blows my
Yeah.
mind.
So, what's your take on Common Core?
Me?
What's your take?
Fuck Common Core. Just fuck that. It's only just made better performing schools worse, and it hasn't really helped poor performing schools at all. So what's the point?
The point is, we need to lower standards so people of color can rise up.
Look, I don't
There
want
might
to
be a
become
truth in that.
equally shit. I want to actually have a good education because I can afford a good education.
You should get a good education because as a human, I believe you deserve that.
Alright, then we should abolish Common Core for that, then.
If
I
that's
believe-
a method you feel would be effective in such a goal, then I will defend you. I almost said something very inappropriate, so I redacted that statement, and I went with
Alright.
defend. So we're just working with defend you.
Works for me, man.
Okay.
Take
So
that any way you like.
So we've come to that time of the night where it's basically gonna be morning soon if we keep doing this. So I think what we should do right now, how the time flies, right? So I think this has been largely a successful first stream for season 2. It could have been slightly better, it could have been slightly worse. We did have some glitches on the way that are obviously going to have to be corrected in
Chris.
But obviously, we deal with
Sorry
things
about
as they
that.
come. So things have been absolutely great. And so what we'll do is, obviously, we'll be having another stream, same time, same place, next week, which is at 2100 Eastern Standard Time. Every week we're going to be having a stream, and the other two types of stream that we talked about earlier on in this live stream, which were, again, just to remind people, this one being stage 501, just the regular stream, and then of course the one we're trying to start up called New School Leftism, which is going to be a variation on this stream that occurs at some point during the week, and then of course This Week in Cringe, which will appear on BitChute and will involve basically pointing out, curating the Museum of Cringe. So there's going to be these things, and they're going to be absolutely fun. I'm sure everyone's going to have a huge amount of fun. So bear with us, and we'll see where we end up.
I guess This Week in Stupid was already taken, I think.
Yeah, it's already been taken by someone. I had to call it slightly different.
Literally Filthy Frank took Cringe of the Week, and I would know I saved the playlist.
And so now we have This Week in Cringe, which is going to be a thing. So I want to sort of get that particular segment up and running by the time we get around to next week. So by the time we get around to next week, you should actually have a date for when that's going to actually happen in the day and time. So that's going to be great. So thank you, all of you, for having come onto this stream today.
Quit
and
kissing
obviously you'll definitely be invited back next time as well, because you guys have delivered very concise, very clear commentary throughout, despite the fact that I was sort of drinking this bottle of wine, which is now down to the point.
And talking very fast at like Sonic the Hedgehog speeds.
I know, right? Gotta go fast. So,
You gotta catch them all, right? Oh, wait, wrong franchise.
wrong
Well, it could work.
franchise. But at any rate, thank you everyone for having come around, and obviously you should, like and subscribe because that's great. Hit that subscribe button.
Because we told you
follow-
to do
Exactly.
it.
Do it. Then we've also got, follow me on social media and also follow Stage 501 Live on social media as well. You can obviously follow all of the people that I've mentioned on Twitter who are in this live stream, so you can follow them individually as well, which I recommend.
At your
you
own
do.
risk.
At your own risk, of course.
I
you never know
also
what might
advise
happen.
this for myself.
And additionally, on top of that, although we're not giving it out in public yet, there is a Discord link that will be coming to you all soon, depending on on circumstances, and obviously subject to vetting once you get in, because we will not have trolls. So, yeah, I think that's basically covered everything, and I think you've done a rather good job. So,
So,
Does anyone-
good night,
Well,
Gracie.
good.
Everyone,
Good
cheers!
night.
So,
if you have
good
any
night,
closing
Gracie.
statements, now would be a great time to have them. Go on.
All right.
Oh, what are we doing? Final comments?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really anything to say, so.
Oh,
Yes,
you know,
please.
actually, I might
You
have
don't
one
need
thing
to
to
actually.
say. No, yes,
Okay.
I have something to say.
Okay, go on.
Okay.
Good. That's right. That's submit to me. That's exactly okay. So I think it would be a great idea if we tried to take takes from like the chat or whatever from what they'd want us to talk about as well, because I think that would just be nothing but bonus. Unless of
Oh,
course the
yes.
topic
No.
is something stupid.
That's a
Like-
fantastic idea. So, like, people in the chat, obviously, during the closing segment, they can put in the stream what they want to see discussed, perhaps next week, and we'll see whether we can squeeze it in and whether we might change up a little bit of our schedule in order to accommodate them. But again, obviously, this is subject to the ideas being actually productive ideas and not just trolling.
Okay, my final comment is I am the Force is with me. I am the Force is with me. I am the Force.
Hey, she said no trolling. If I can't troll, you can't either.
Okay, sorry.
Just kidding. I won't stop, so I can't stop you.
Okay, so
Hey.
you're all done quite well. In fact, we need to actually have a Star Wars stream at some point as well. Now that you said
No,
mention that.
God. Okay.
Yes.
fine.
Yes, I second that. Or you would like my you would like my Anakin as a clone bit. Trust me.
I told you that was stupid. I told you that
I
was
think
stupid.
Hara would like it. I think she would actually like Star Wars
quite
if she
enjoy
heard
it.
it.
I know.
I get really bored easily, so I remember I started watching Star Wars as a very young kid with my cousin, and it was all like black and white and shit on our shitty TV, and it was like, fuck this, I'd rather go out in the woods, you know what I mean? So I missed out on some things.
Yeah,
But-
I
we're
know
gonna
what you
have
mean.
to- We're gonna have to bring you up to speed. But anyway, we're running
I
out
can
of
do it.
time. We're
I'll make
running
it
out of time.
entertaining.
Okay, we
So-
get it, you want us to fuck out. End the stream then.
Yes, so we're going to go to stream ending, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.